look at me, I'm Julian.
Anybody that it's got something intelligent, it's got a cool little setup, it's got an interesting personality, and it can sell an interesting conversation, theoretically can start a podcast.
100%.
Yeah.
Please go on. What I was going to ask about it. I love the color gradient of these books. It's going from blue to green, which I love.
We'll come back to them. But do you want to talk about say hello and
No, talk about them.
Well, do you want to talk about who you're talking to and what the vibe is?
I'm talking to Dan, and I'm here to meet Dan, and let's go. I guess
Hey,
if we can either start with these books, these Holy Words of God books, or the first question I had was, is Pink Floyd your favourite band of all time?
Oh, that's a bleeding great question.
It is. It's almost rude because there's so many great bands to choose from.
If I was to nut it down to one, I'd have to say Pink Floyd. Yeah. But there's so many great bands from the Beatles and Led Zeppelin we're talking about, and I've got 40,000 songs in that folder there. But it's if there was anything that is just ubiquitous, it's got to be Pink Floyd.
Even more than the Beatles.
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, I used to say the Beatles.
Yeah.
I've got 4,000 unpublished Beatles takes. I collect. So for example, we know Strawberry Fields Forever. That's take 27. I've got the first 26 takes.
Yeah.
I've been collecting from various places, but
that would be fun to listen to just in a row.
Oh yeah.
I'd love to listen to like from take one all the way through and just to see how the actual idea developed.
That's one of the things. My brother and I, when we were kids, we would have been about maybe 12 years old or something like that, and we debate what is the greatest love song ever written, and we both agreed that it was "The Long and Winding Road" by the Beatles.
Okay.
And for years I always longed to hear the recording sessions of it and to hear the song develop and to hear them almost composing it. And I kind of prayed about it. I remember years and years and years ago, oh God, one day let me have the recording sessions for The Long and Winding Road by the Beatles. And maybe 25 years ago, I was chatting with this guy, and he said, oh yeah, I've got some tapes that were leaked from Abbey Road. And my head almost exploded, and I was like, you wouldn't happen to have the recording sessions of The Long and Winding Road? And he goes, yeah, I've got about 12 takes of it or something like that, including them experimenting. I'll play you some them experiment. Paul almost composing the song. He's mucking around with it and trying to experiment with different chords and things, and write down to different takes. And I flipped and I said, well, how can I get a copy of this? And I offered to pay him some money, but he said he only had them on a tape that was a copy of the reel-to-reels or whatever that was leaked from Abbey Road. And so I said, well, I'll put that tape onto CD for you for free. And here you go. Now I've got, it's like an answer to prayer, the recording sessions of The Long and Winding Road, And then from there, over the years, I ended up collecting, about 8,000 takes. So that's a long answer to say that I used to say the Beatles were the greatest, and they're still right up there, but now I'd say Pink Floyd. Overall, Pink Floyd they're more of an oral sculpture. They're just, if Atom Heart Mother, the track, and the song Dogs on Animals, just such uncomprehendable masterpieces. There's nothing that compares to them,
Yeah. I don't know what I think the greatest love song of all time is. I feel like it's probably a Bob Dylan song. What song, though? I'd have to come back to that. I don't know exactly what song it would be, but it's a great question.
But aren't all Bob's love songs unrequited? Like Sarah, he's singing it to his wife after she left him.
That was one of the first ones that came to my head was Sarah. That is one of the greatest love songs ever, but yeah.
It opens with Sarah, whatever made you want to change your mind.
Yeah. What a way to close an album. Make You Feel My Love's a beautiful, beautiful love song.
His genius.
Can't even... He was outside of himself when he wrote that one. That was just unbelievable. Do you have a favourite Pink Floyd album?
Again, it's just so difficult to say, but I mean...
I like to say that these are rude questions. I think that it was rude, like asking someone what their favourite band is, or like favourite movie, or like, how can you choose?
You've got to provoke. You got to push buttons. You got to provoke people. But I'd say if I had a favourite Floyd album, it would probably be Animals, but it would also possibly be Adam Heart Mother or Metal or Pipe at the Gates of Dawn, or even A Momentary Lapse of Reason is just loaded with these magnificent side 2, these dark, tragic pieces about sorrow and about eternity, you know.
And we still haven't got to you didn't even mention Dark Side
Yeah,
or The Wall.
Yeah.
Is that just because they're too obvious?
No, it's not because they're too obvious. They're great albums. But I guess, to be honest with you, if they weren't so obvious, then maybe I'd highlight them more.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I've heard them so much over the years, and I love them so much that that I don't know. It's kind of I'm riding my bike. I'm cruising down through the city. I got a little speaker on the front.
That inspired me to pick up a small speaker the day after I saw you with that little one. I was like, I need a small one just for around the house that's really easy for me to pick up and carry around.
Yeah, cool. So I'm riding my bike through the city, whatever, and then I kind of get this longing to hear some of the guitar solos on Adam Heart Mother or on on Dogs or whatever else, and it's just like I gravitate towards some of those recordings more than Dark Side and Wish You Were Here. I mean, of course, there's nothing that compares to Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here. Some of the most phenomenal compositions. How in the world did they do it, you know?
Time is amazing.
Oh, yeah. Man, my goodness.
Chasing away the moments that make up the dull day. Oh, man. Just
fritter and waste the hours in an offhand way. Engineered by Alan Parsons from the Alan Parsons Project. Are you familiar with him?
No, I'm not. I'm not. But
man.
Feel free to ramble on about it because I'll listen back to this, and then it'll remind me and inspire me to listen back to.
So while you're listening back to this, you need to press pause and you need to listen to you need to listen to Tales of Mystery and Imagination by the Alan Parsons Project. It's a concept album on Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, okay.
The horror writer. And
so he had a significant hand in the sonic quality of those albums.
Yeah, well, I mean, Alan Parsons engineered Dark Side of the Moon, engineered Sgt. Pepper's.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So, yeah, just wild, you know. But yeah, and then the last track from that first Alan Parsons album is called To One in Paradise. And it's all about death, and I could go into it, but, you know, it's like looking into paradise, you know. And then also Alan Parsons did an album, a song you'd probably be familiar with called The Eye in the Sky. And the last track on that album is called Old and Wise. And again, another song about the moment you leave your body and you slip into eternity. And I won't even go into it, but you must listen to it. I mean, you must listen to both of those tracks. Old and Wise is by far the better of the two. But you must listen to it in the dark, and you must turn it up really loud and listen to the saxophone solo as it fades out, because your soul will fade into eternity. It's just phenomenal. There's nothing that compares to it.
Yeah, I feel like volume is a really important aspect of a lot of those albums. Like, because you can listen to them in the background, or you can listen to them on headphones or something like that, but like they really were made to be cranked and listened. Like, if you're not listening to them on like the loudest possible volume, there is like a spice missing from a really nice dish. Like, there's just something that's just not quite translating as well as it could, and you need to make that extra effort.
Well, they deserve to be paid attention to, and it's actually an indictment on us as listeners to actually stop everything and listen, because when you do, it's like it changes your life. It's world changing.
Yeah.
But if you got it on the background, you go, oh yeah, that's a nice song, whatever, you know. It's like, but it's like, you know, looking at a Vincent van Gogh painting, or looking at, you know, some other form of art, and giving it the attention it deserves. I'd say that music by far is more emotional and powerful than even a visual piece of art, you know, oil on canvas or something. Music whether it's an orchestra or whether it's just a solo guitar and a solo voice. Some songs, important songs, of which there's gazillions, deserve our careful attention. And when we do give it that attention, it does change your life and does change the world around you. Yeah.
I think a good gig does that as well. I think that's how you know you've seen a good show or a good gig. Is because
But it's rare nowadays. I've got to tell you, it's rare.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
We used to go to gigs and it'd blow your mind, what's going on. But it's been a long time since I've, been at a gig and just been turned upside down. It's rare. The last one would have been Nick Cave at the Enmore Theatre. He's playing the Mercy Seat, acoustic style, and then breaks into the electric. Are you familiar with the song The Mercy Seat?
Yeah, I saw Nick Cave last year that he was doing a solo piano tour with Colin Greenwood from Radiohead just over at the ICC Theatre.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. It was absolutely spectacular.
Oh, I wish I'd seen that. That's amazing. And by the time he's ending the Mercy Seat, I remember this sensation of my hair. It was like a full power fan in front of my face, and my hair just being thrown back, as he screams, "But I'm afraid I told a lie." And it's just like, oh man, just.
When was that?
Oh, that was actually, it was quite a while ago. Maybe 15 years ago or something, 10 years ago.
Were you born in Australia?
Yeah, Australia, 1973.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
You would have a different, a much different, perspective and appreciation of artists like that. I would say, like Nick Cave.
Yeah, well,
compared to me, I love Nick Cave, but I wouldn't say that not current in the way that say bands like Powderfinger and Silverchair probably were current in terms of popular Australian music when I was sort of growing up. Nick Cave did a lot of his stuff was he around in the 70s?
Yeah,
he was doing a lot of stuff in the 80s and the 90s and stuff
they were
that.
the Birthday Party. They were recording in the 70s.
Yeah.
They were in the Melbourne scene. There's a lot of documentaries about it. In fact, if you've seen the film Dogs in Space, starring Michael Hutchence.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's a quintessential.
Is it a movie or a documentary?
A film. No, it's a film, and Michael Hutchence stars as this crazy, deranged drug head, and just so shows how fried, the culture was, but living in this party house, and it was a lot of fun, but they, the destruction around that, and but it's basically capturing the scene. They called it the little band scene in Melbourne, and so you'd have,
Did you ever live in Melbourne?
I was living in Melbourne for a year or so in the early 90s.
Oh, cool.
But we're talking about late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah.
And they, you got the Beast of Bourbon and Tex Perkins, and you've got Nick. They were later, but then you've got. That was the scene that kind of built everything that we know as Australian hardcore rock today. But you've got Nick Cave and all those guys, and just crazy. They called it the little bands because they'd have that this whole scene of 10 different bands, and they'd just grab random people on a night, and then they'd come up with a name, and some names very offensive. I won't even allow that to come out of my mouth, some of the names of some of the bands. And then they'd do a one-off gig just playing random amazing trash, and it was just phenomenal. Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing stuff. And I'd love to have experienced that. But the film Dogs in Space kind of captures that scene and captures the party atmosphere, but then the end destruction that it brings. And so it's a brilliant, phenomenal film. Yeah, must see. Yeah.
One question I always like to ask is what was the first concert you went to? What was the biggest concert you've ever been to? And what was the best concert?
Ooh, great questions.
Yeah.
The first concert was probably, I think it was In Excess in 1987, I'm guessing.
Wow.
For the Kick Tour, which was their last good album. Everything after that was just crap. It was just trash, unlistenable. Sorry, guys, but everything before it was brilliant. But then I don't know what happened. Apparently, Michael hit his head, and I don't know exactly what the time frames, but
Really?
it just went down. Yeah.
Oh, he had a head, like, legit?
Yeah. When he
head
was in
injury?
Europe, yeah.
Oh.
And it's covered in a couple of documentaries. But apparently, he kind of lost the soul of the music. Some people are suggesting, and they had a couple of nice songs. They were big hits because they were a big band. But everything after Kick was just kind of downhill, in my opinion. But everything before it was just brilliant,
That's a hell of a first gig.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a kid. I would have been 14.
Wow.
So, but we were focusing on their earlier stuff. So we discovered In Excess through, I think the first album was Listen Like Thieves, but then the next one we really were listening to was a compilation called In Excessive. And it had all their early singles. I don't know if you've heard of it. There was a track called We Are the Vegetables.
Okay, yeah.
And it was, you've got to hear it. Like, stop listening to this right now and listen to We Are the Vegetables by In Excess.
Cool.
And then come back. But the thing is that We Are the Vegetables, basically, I think the band was actually called The Vegetables at the time.
Oh.
And it's just, people are now talking about it as one of the most important punk recordings and just significant. Like, what is this? We are the vegetables. Just crazy, wild guitar and upbeat. Magnificent, it's a must hear, and so we discovered them by then. And so when they were performing Kick live, it was kind of like, well, this is well polished, and it just didn't have that stuff that we were.
It's like a pop record by comparison.
Yeah, by comparison, yeah, and we were kind of getting into Shabu Shabat and the swing, like side 2 of the swing. Oh man, and side 1, what an album, 1984, I think it was, but we discovered it in about 85. I was 12 years old, so we discovered it about 85, 86. And brilliant. So that was, I think, my first gig. What was the next one? The biggest gig?
Yeah, so like biggest in terms of just the biggest amount of people that you've ever been a part of in one spot to see a show.
Really great question. Just if my head kind of flicks around, thinking of big arenas, we saw the Stones at the Olympic Arena there.
When was that?
And that would have been probably 20 years ago, I guess, so maybe 2004 or something.
Oh, wow.
And we were right at the back. I mean, like right at the back of the back, right up high.
I saw them in Adelaide the last time they came.
Yeah, wow. What year was that?
It must have been like 2013,
Yeah,
2014, something like that.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, just a bucket list situation.
Yeah. Great, yeah. Well, the thing is that the Stones just carried this power, and even right at the back, everyone is just getting wild into it. And, we witnessed some inappropriate behavior even right at the back. It's just like, wow, far out, what's going on?
Those songs just do that to people. Like, where else would you rather, even if you're at the back, like, where else would you rather be when they're playing something off Exile on Main Street?
Yeah. You want to hear an Exile on Main Street story?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
That's
all right.
exactly what I want to hear.
Our friend Julie Anderson, who we
That's
met in London.
like, of all the Rolling Stones albums, that's the only album that's ever made me question if I think the Stones are better than the Beatles.
Yeah, great.
That's their greatest argument in my mind. It's like, well, they have Exile, and that's just
it's phenomenal.
flawless.
It's brilliant. There's actually a documentary on the album, and it goes through. They're actually walking through the manor that Keith was renting when they recorded the album. So I've got a book, actually. She sent me a copy a little while ago. Our friend Julie Anderson, who we met in London in 2008. And she was secretary for Brian Epstein in 1964, 65, I believe. It's all in the book. So basically secretary for the Beatles.
Yeah.
And she became friends with the Stones. She married John Walker, not Scott Walker, John Walker from the Walker Brothers. You know the Walker Brothers?
No, I don't.
The sun ain't gonna shine anymore. Listen to it.
Yep.
Change your life.
Okay.
And she married him, and she's talking about all her friends. And Bill Wyman from the Stones writes an intro to this book. It's called Rehearsal. Hi, Julie, if you're listening. Basically, she was sitting in Keith's living room in this manor in the south of France. When they're recording the album, they were living there for a while because John Walker was recording one of his solo albums at the same time. And basically, long story short, she was sitting in Keith's living room. This is wild stuff, man. And she looks at Keith and she sees like this evil spirit hovering above him. She sees it physically. She's not on drugs. She was previously on drugs, but she'd kind of been off drugs for a little while. But basically, she sees this, and this is an spiritual experience. And in her book Rehearsal, she talks into a lot of detail about these spiritual experiences. But basically, she saw this demon hovering over Keith, and she goes into detail about what happened. And then I think it was later that night, it's all in the book, she audibly hears the voice of Jesus. And it kind of blows her mind. And the book goes into real detail, but long story short, she just said, this is real. This is, it's all real, you know? And so she instantly got into God and got on her face and repented and got right with God. And that was basically in Keith Richards' living room in the manor there in France. And all the Stones saw this instant turnaround. She went from being this brat to this really passionately godly woman, you know, loving, and it just changed everything. And so she's written a book which goes into real detail, you know.
What's the name of the book?
Rehearsal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, by Julie Anderson. Yeah, it's a fascinating book. Yeah.
I mean, there was definitely something spiritual going on if they were able to write "Shine a Light."
Yeah.
Like that's one of the most gospel songs that like ever existed.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. And I always think that like one of the things I like wrote down because I think that it's true is that I believe music is God's greatest weapon / tool for like reaching the secular world. You know, like there's a whole world out there trapped in Satan's systems, and music is the way that he's able to get under people's guards. You know, like there's a lot of distrust about God because of religion and because of the church and just because of the, you know, don't think Chinese whispers is the right word, but just, you know, the people using the gospel for their own personal gain. Throughout history, like you could just
freaks.
We could spend the rest of our lives pointing at examples of it, you know. But music is this way that God is able to get past all of our defenses and just like straight to our heart.
Yeah.
And like Shine a Light is a perfect example of that. You know, like when I was a kid with no interest in like religion specifically or Christianity or belief or any of these sort of things. It's not that I was disinterested, but you know, a song like Shine a Light being on a Stones album, like right at the end, you know, that plants a seed that all of these years later continues to grow into like a deeper and deeper faith. Like that's God's hand in the world.
It's fascinating
right
stuff, yeah, because I mean, you know, you got Keith who
as opposed to Sympathy for the Devil or something like that, you know.
You got Keith who snorted his grandfather's ashes. Is that correct?
I've heard something along those lines, or his father's.
Yeah, his father's. Yeah, I think I was going to say that, but I wasn't certain. And yeah, you hear all these crazy stories, and then they're into some pretty weird, you know, their Satanic Majesty's Request album in 1968. I'm guessing, which was a response to Sgt. Pepper's, you know, because the good guys and the bad guys, you know, and so a lot of dark stuff, but at the same time, just these little snippets that come out, and it's like, what's going on in the spiritual dimension? It's very fascinating, you know, and in the Bible it talks about God sets eternity in the hearts of men, you know, so we all know deep in our heart, deep in our soul, that eternity is real. You know, our spirits will exist forever, and where are we going, you know? And most people spend their whole lives just running away from that question. They just don't want to think about it. And I'd probably say, at a guess, a vast majority would reach their deathbed and still not want to face that question. And then, you know, a couple of minutes later, it's too late.
Yeah.
You know? So it's a fascinating thing, you know, eternity and the gospel. People want spiritual things. This is why, like Bob Dylan's first Christian album, when he turned to Christ in 1979, Slow Train Coming, that was number one everywhere. It was number one in Australia.
Yeah, Grammys.
Right at the top.
Grammy
everywhere.
for best vocal.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah, and you're going to have to serve somebody. It might be the devil or it might be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. There's an interview with Nick Cave. He says he's sitting in a bar in London in 1979, and I think it's 79, he says, but he's sitting there and the song had just come out. It was a bit of a hit, and he says he heard this haunting song on the jukebox, and in his words, he said, it scared the F out of him. This is what he says, you know, and it said it terrified me. It effing terrified me, I think were his words. I have to pull out the interview. And then he went to see, what is this song? You're going to have to serve somebody. It might be the devil or it might be the Lord. And there you go. So good old Nick is getting rocked. And no wonder Nick has so much spiritual content. Although he says he's an atheist, I think deep down he believes, you know.
Well, I know that he enjoys going to church. Like, at least I've heard him say something along those lines.
We love him.
If I ever get the chance, just throwing it out to the universe, if I ever get the chance to sit across from Nick Cave one day, that will be the thing I ask him. I will ask him about that experience, because I have listened to Slow Train Coming a million times. Like I love all three of those gospel Dylan albums, and then the live one that came out maybe like 5 or 6 years ago.
Trouble No More. Yeah.
Absolutely changed my life, like completely.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, when like Eastern mysticism and Buddhism and all of this stuff and drugs and worldliness was trying to like pull me in this direction. That album, those albums, that was like my solid rock. Like I was just like, my love of those things was too great. Yeah, like it just stuck to me like glue.
Bob was passionate. He apparently
that's what got me. Like his passion, his fervor, his conviction. You can hear his conviction. He transcends his own abilities as a musician. Like even just that he's singing beyond his like vocals. Like it's pouring out of him. It's
and he's
incredible.
crying when he sings. When he returns, you know, you can hear the tears.
Yeah.
You know? The last track on Slow Train. But yeah, apparently he...
And sorry to interrupt, but it's just, like, it's so groovy as well. Like Gotta Serve Somebody is just, like... It's groovy. Like, and that's why it's my favourite. Like, it has this groove to it. Like, he had the best band at that time. Like,
That's great.
I think Mark Knopfler
That's
played
right.
on...
Slow Train, yeah. I was reading an interview with Mark Knopfler, and he said that he got asked to play with Bob, and he's like, awesome, playing with Bob. And then he said he gets into the studio, he hadn't heard nothing about this Christian stuff, and then Bob's singing all these songs about Jesus, and he's like, what? And I love Dire Straits. Mark is a genius, But apparently Bob, for a number of years, I don't know how long, 3 or 4 years, apparently stopped singing his general secular songs. And just singing songs about Jesus. Yeah. And apparently he was getting a lot of booze, but he couldn't care less. Yeah. And he went...
And you're going to love that.
Yeah, he went wild. And there's a lot of interviews, he says things... In that era, he says things like, there's only 2 types of people. There's saved people and there's lost people. Jesus is Lord, and every knee shall bow to him.
Yeah, he's just preaching, like just full on preaching from the stage.
Oh, cool, man. And then
the only time I've ever seen Bob Dylan without a guitar as well. Like there's like parts of songs and stuff where he's just holding the mic singing, and it looks so strange. Like, but it's just amazing.
Yeah. And if you see the interview where he's been in the Brett Whiteley studio in Sydney, he's been interviewed. I think it's about 1986. And you get these idiot Australian journalists who they've got their own agenda. We're going to prove that Bob is no longer a Christian, And then so they ask leading questions. So how long ago did you stop being Christian? How long ago did you renounce your faith? Whatever. And he's like, what? And so these idiot journalists, they've done it all the time since about the mid 80s, even through to now, trying to kind of put Bob in a box. So Bob responds. If you watch that interview, it's on YouTube. He says, I don't trust anybody unless they play gospel music. That's what he says. Yeah. Just to put it in their face, and they're like, oh.
But even a song like Let It Be, that's got gospel I don't know if they're overtones or undertones, or if it's just actually right there in your face. Like that's like what we were saying about that Stone song, "Shine a Light." Like "Let It Be" is just as gospel in my eyes. Like, you know,
I find it fascinating when artists that overtly say they're not Christian or they're atheist or whatever come up with spiritual themes and spiritual songs. It's almost as though they're tapping into something and they're receiving something.
and then that they go on to be ginormous hits as well.
yeah,
It's
that's
just proof that like people, whether they
want
want
the
to admit
spiritual.
it or whether they're like intellectually aware of it or not, they need it. You know, and I feel like, you know, a lot of us might not even understand why we gravitate to the music that we do, but if you dig a little bit deeper, like it's because it's a lot of it's gospel music in a certain way. There's even like a Radiohead song that I heard that I didn't realize until I was hearing it sung live, and I was actually listening to the lyrics, and I was like, that's just scripture.
Come on.
Does Tom York even know that? Like, do the artists even know, or is God just using us all as pawns in His game? You know,
That's so funny. We used to go dancing a lot at goth clubs, gothic industrial music clubs in Sydney, like Sanctuary and Roller Coaster, a bunch of different, you know, magnificent clubs. And we're talking in the 90s. And I remember the songs that people would flood to the dance floor often had spiritual themes. Do you know the band KMFDM?
no, I don't.
Yeah, so German band, just intense
Does that
industrial
stand for
music.
something?
Well, there is a suggestion it stands for something, a couple of things, but you know, I'm not certain. But basically, KMFDM and some of their more famous tracks. There's one called "Die Now, Live Later," and the lyrics are: "The cross of Christ divides between the lost and the saved." You know, you must be born again. You know, just and with these phenomenal beats, you got to hear it. You know, you got to listen to it, and loud. And another song called "Godlike." Now is the time. Get on the right side. You'll be godlike. And just these great tracks. We had goth friends they do not believe in God. They do not believe in a spiritual dimension. They're atheists. They're quite militantly so. And wearing a T-shirt that says "I will pray," which is a song, remixed by not Depeche Mode, by KMFDM. I was thinking about Depeche Mode, but a remix by KMFDM of "Godlike," and the remix is called "I Will Pray." I will pray and pray for your country to undergo recovery. And so it's like,
Oh, whoa.
all these, you got to hear it, all these spiritual themes that unbelievers love, you know. So it's fascinating stuff, and it really, you know, I think that a lot of people, you know, want eternity to be real, but I think most people are too afraid that if it is real, they'll have to stop their...
It brings about like that quote in the Bible. Well, I shouldn't say. I don't know if it's a quote. I don't know if it's is it technically a quote if you're like
verse.
Yeah, but yeah, you know how we quote things. Do you quote the Bible?
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Don't
Anyway.
stress out about it.
No, yeah, it's just a thought. I feel like it like sits in a different sort of like vein of like reciting something, but how, you know, like everything works together for good for those who believe in God.
For those who love God, yeah. That's right, yeah. Because a lot of people say they believe in God, but do you love Him?
Yeah, all of that sacrilegiousness of, like, say, the early Stones or the Beatles or the counterculture or the, you know, rock and roll is the devil's music sort of feelings and vibes and thoughts and stuff. And yeah, that's true until you get to Let It Be or until you get to, you know, it's like it's like a sleight of hand sort of situation.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. I mean... have you heard that basically there's evidence that for a period I'll have to get the book, but I think it was around about 1976 for a period, John Lennon became Christian.
When was this?
I think it was about 1976. I could pull out the book and get all the detail. But basically...
No, definitely haven't heard that.
yeah, so there's a book called The Gospel According to the Beatles, written by Steve Turner, who's a phenomenal journalist, and you got to get it. But basically... it's even got letters from John, and he wrote to Oral Roberts, a minister from Oral Roberts University. Basically, John was sitting in his, I don't want to misquote it, so it was either his apartment or a hotel room, but he was sitting and watching a lot of Billy Graham preaching, and he was also watching some Easter services presenting, these spiritual themes. And then basically God hit him, and he realized, hey, I'm going to turn to God. And this book goes into detail, and the letters and what he wrote to Oral Roberts. He says, is this Christianity thing real, or is it all made up because I want out of hell? And
that's interesting, because I thought I recalled hearing or reading something about him kind of taking jabs at Bob Dylan when Bob Dylan went Christian.
Well, that's
but
true.
That would have been
That was
after
later.
what
That's
you're
right.
talking about. So it obviously didn't stick.
That's right. Well, that's what I was about to get to. So basically, he started writing these songs about finding God, finding Christ, and he was telling everyone. Apparently, it's about 3 months, and the book goes into serious detail about it. And then basically, Yoko, we all know, was a witch. And most people know that, and she's not afraid to say. And she couldn't fly. I mean, she couldn't fly
you
west.
listen to some
or
of
she
her.
couldn't fly east.
I don't know if you'd call it music, but some of those things that she puts out is
Some of her screams.
that is hard to listen to. Like, if that's not witchery, I don't know what is.
So funny. But basically, she was into some crazy stuff, and so she gathered a lot of her witchy friends around, and they just pummeled John non-stop for the 3 months until he said, all right, yep, and he renounced Christ and basically said, so he had written songs about God and everything, and then when Bob released Slow Train Coming, John was quite incensed because he said, oh, well, I've gone through that and I've decided it's not true.
Yeah.
And as John does with everything, he got passionately into it. But then now Bob, after, like 3 years later, is now really, like Bob was one of John's idols. John loved Bob. He highly looked up to him. And now the ultimate non-conformer, Bob Dylan, the voice of a generation, is now saying, turn to Christ or you're going to hell for all eternity. All right? That was Bob's message, and he was just going straight at it, straight for the jugular, no mucking around, and John was incensed. So Bob released the song, You Gotta Serve Somebody, and then John wrote a song called Serve Yourself.
Oh, in response.
Yeah. And so, long story short, also we saw Winky Pratney, who was in ministry with Keith Green. We saw him speaking at the Entertainment Centre in Sydney maybe 25 years ago or something, and he was talking about how he actually, through some contacts, actually organised an audience with John Lennon, and he was going to just go up to him, and he'd organised to meet with him and sit down with him for an hour and interview him or something, and he was just going to share the gospel with him and the love of God, and just talk about stuff. And basically, apparently he was getting on the plane, and we're talking, I think, November 1980, I'm pretty sure this was. But basically, he's about to get on the plane, and then somehow Yoko or someone got wind of, this is one of these Christian ministers. They cancelled the appointment, and a week or two later, John was dead.
Wow.
Crazy. So I don't have any books that detail that, but we saw Winky specifically say that. I should look it up and find. I'm sure he's put it in writing somewhere. But full-on stuff, I mean, these things affect eternity,
Yeah.
And
it's interesting how, as well, like when Bob Dylan went gospel, he did it in the most like punk rock way that like I've ever seen. Like he's just been punk rock his whole life, like everything that he's ever done.
Pistols,
like he really is. And it's funny how like the Christian life or the spiritual life, there's almost like in youth that seems like the dominant authority. It's not the right word that I'm looking for, but like then it feels like it gets to a point where like to be Christian becomes countercultural and punk rock, but it doesn't seem like that at the start of the spiritual journey. And like many of us tend to go, like the opposite way.
Well, you want to hear high end?
That seems like the conformist.
Are you aware of about a year? I think it was 2 years ago, of what happened with Marilyn Manson?
With the whole Kanye West thing, when they tried to cancel him, and his ex-wife was calling him a rapist and all that stuff.
No,
I don't know the specifics.
We're talking. You can watch a lot of videos showing the footage and showing some of the detail, but basically, Kanye had invited Marilyn Manson to come and attend a inverted commas Sunday service.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Kanye has gone a bit cuckoo since then, so whatever. But nevertheless...
I tend to give Kanye the benefit of the doubt for some reason.
Yeah, you know.
Because I just love him, and I love his gospel music. And
But that Jesus is King album was pretty phenomenal stuff. Yeah,
absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
So I believe he's going to come back to a bit of reality soon, because he just went off the handle for a short while this year. But nevertheless, we can't judge anybody. But nevertheless, basically, he had invited Marilyn Manson to come and participate in this Sunday service with, of all bizarre people, somebody unlistenable in my opinion, Justin Bieber.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So you got Kanye, you got Marilyn Manson, who's in the middle of these rape allegations and might be going to jail for 20 years or 50 years or God knows what, because apparently it's some pretty hardcore stuff. And so he's flipped. He's pretty stressed. And then you got Justin Bieber, and you can watch, I can show you a video right now. Basically, Kanye and the team are doing these, I'll call them hymns or some kind of chant songs to God, and they're pretty cool. And then they start praying. And have you seen this footage of,
I haven't.
Of Kanye and Justin Bieber starts praying, and Justin Bieber says this prayer for about like a minute or two, and he's talking about the Holy Spirit and repentance and forgiveness and, you know, getting to heaven in this prayer. And Marilyn Manson is standing there with his eyes closed, and he's kind of nodding, and he looks like he's agreeing with it. We're talking Marilyn Manson here.
Yeah.
We're talking about Antichrist superstar. We're talking about one of the most significant goth industrial artists, you know, ever.
Yeah.
One of the most respected. And I mean, you know, he burns Bibles on stages. He does the craziest stuff. And now there's footage of him doing this. And then the whole internet is like bubbling, like, you know, it's a fish tank full of piranha. It's just, the whole internet is bubbling. Like, what is going on? What's happening with Marilyn Manson? And people reached out to him, and you can watch the actual detail. People talk about it, and they even quote the response from Marilyn Manson's publicist. But they reached out and said, "Has Marilyn Manson become Christian?" You know what the response was? Look it up for yourself. This is the response. "That's nobody's business." Now think about that, right? If he hadn't, or if there wasn't anything spiritual going on, it'd say, "Yeah, you know, as if, you know, whatever," and just trashing it and say something, you know, blasphemous, whatever. But instead, he responds, "That's nobody's business."
Yeah.
And we haven't really heard much from him since. So I'm hoping and praying and believing that maybe, you know, something is good going on with our brother, you know, dear Marilyn, and maybe he's turned to God and there's hope for his eternity, you know, because you got to admit, you know, he has been extremely antichrist and extremely, inverted commas, evil. So, you know, who's going to hell? You know, who's going to heaven? I mean, he's the kind of guy that would say, "Hey, I want to be first in line for hell." You know, obviously he didn't believe it or doesn't believe it, didn't believe it, but perhaps he does now. You know, and so I recommend you check out that footage, and then also check out some of the metal YouTube channels actually detail that the reach out to his publicist and the response, which is that's nobody's business.
Yeah, wow.
Fascinating.
That's interesting. I didn't know any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember like the media coming after him with a lot of vitriol. But you're right. I haven't heard, but you haven't heard. I'm always skeptical though whenever anyone comes after anyone with that much like fervor. Like it's just like it almost doesn't make sense to me. Like something seems up when people are putting in that much hate into what they're doing.
It's fascinating. Do you want to hear a Robert Plant story?
Yeah, yep.
My friend Martin in London in around about, I think he said it was about 1983, was in a bar hanging out, and there's Robert Plant. I could get the details of which bar it was, but basically they're singing, Robert's singing a cappella, a couple of things at the bar, and Martin, this guy's a full-on, he loves God, man. He just gives his life for God. Everything he talks about, everything he does is just Jesus, heaven, hell, eternity, get right with God. And anyway, so he's in this bar, and he says to Robert Plant, "Hey, sing the Lord's Prayer." And so Robert does. And he gets up and he's like, sings this magnificent, apparently, rendition of the Lord's Prayer right there in the bar. Now, where this gets a little bit more interesting is some of the spiritual aspects behind the music. I'm sure you've heard of what they called in the 1980s, a lot of the conspiracy theorists called backmasking. You've heard of that?
No, I don't.
You've never heard of backmasking?
No, that's
Man, there's a whole world.
It's not a word I'm familiar with at all.
Wow, you got to discover this. There's a whole world of Christian conspiracy theorists in the 80s talking about that Led Zeppelin you play their records backwards and it's got a Satan message.
Oh,
and stuff
okay.
like
That's what backmasking refers to?
Backmasking. And now there's a lot of actual really interesting stuff. I've actually got a book in my library there which actually has scientific studies on recordings. And it's written by some scientists in Australia, and I don't even have the title, I could pull it up, but basically they study and they say that the more passionately you sing about something, if you play that recording backwards or you talk about something passionately or you sing about it, whatever you're the more passionate about, when you play that recording backwards, the more passionate you are, the more likelihood there is of a spiritual message revealing your true intention. And this book goes into real scientific detail, and they've got hundreds of case studies. Basically, in this book, they take, and I've heard it with my own ears. Have you ever taken the song "Stairway to Heaven" on the vinyl and played it backwards?
No, I haven't.
Well, I'm going to say something offensive because it might hurt your ears, but basically, the line, "Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on." You know that lyric?
Yeah.
You play it backwards. I'm not joking. You'll hear it with your own ears, right? And you can watch people do it on YouTube. Play it backwards and it says, I'm going to say an offensive name here, but basically it says, "Glory, glory to my sweet Satan. He will send you 666. Hear it with your own ears, man. Right? I mean, that's freaky stuff. My friend Andres, who's a hardcore, rocking, crazy trash singer from a band called Derby, Christian band. They haven't played in a while, but they're a Sydney band, maybe, I guess, 20 years ago. And I said, hey, because he's a major Led Zeppelin fan, and I said, man, you got to hear Stairway to Heaven backwards, man, check this out. And he's like, and I played it for him and about 10 people in the room, and he's like, and then he said to me, Dan, you've ruined Led Zeppelin for me. But here's where it gets interesting. In this book, they analysed later on, 10 years later after that recording, a live recording of Stairway to Heaven, and the same scene played backwards on this vinyl. I think they said it was it The Song Remains the Same soundtrack or a different, something later, but live recording, it's all in the book. You play the live recording of Stairway to Heaven backwards 10 years later, and you hear Robert say, you ready for it? "Oh Lord, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me."
Oh, wow.
Now that's wild stuff, man. We've heard this stuff with our own ears, you know. I mean, we know the Beatles experimented and they put in deliberate backmasking. You know, "Paul is dead, man. Dig it, dig it." That was at the end of "I'm So Tired," I think. And the Electric Light Orchestra and a lot of bands deliberately put in backwards messages, you know. But when it's spiritual, when it's something that is not intentional, that's where it gets fascinating. And it might be real, might not be real, but this scientific book actually goes into a lot of detail. And I'd be inclined to say, having seen so much spiritual stuff in my life, so many miracles, so many crazy things, I'd be inclined to say that it's correct, it's true. And very interesting, especially with that Robert Plant example, yeah.
Well, yeah, there was a lot going on. Like, didn't they have Aleister Crowley's house?
Jimmy Page bought Aleister Crowley's house on Loch Ness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jimmy Page, even recently, I was watching
There's
an
a lot
interview.
of just a lot of weird stuff going on back there. Like they weren't afraid to. They weren't afraid to like tempt evil spirits back then.
Well, Jimmy Page apparently owned a whole set of occult bookshops, and even a recent interview, they asked him about the Golden Dawn, which was one of the occult organisations, and that Aleister Crowley apparently established or something. I don't know in detail, but Jimmy talks about it in a very positive light. And again, this is like only a year or two ago, I think, on YouTube. And it's like, yeah, I love the guy. He's an amazing artist, songwriter, musician, Yardbirds, everything on down. But I really fear for his eternity, because when it comes down to it, is, none of us are better than each other, but we all got to receive forgiveness to get to heaven. And if we're sticking our fists in the air at God and say, stuff you, I'm not interested, whether it's just something as simple as that, or whether it's someone like Jimmy Page getting heavily involved in the occult and demons, it's basically we're all going to stand before God, and we can do anything we want for 100 years. We can live our lives, live for yourself, hurt people, do what you want. We've got free will, man, right? God gave Adam and Eve free will to do what they wanted, right? But we're all going to stand before God. And so we've got 100 years to do what we want, and then we're going to stand before God, and then there's eternity, right? So I'm no better than anyone else, but we've got to receive forgiveness. And so that's the most important thing in my mind, that I'm like, God, forgive me. We've got to be genuine, right?
Yeah.
If it's not sincere, then, hey man, where are we going to go, It's wild stuff, man.
What about the best concert you've ever been to?
The best concert? Oh, man.
Yeah, I know that's hard.
Such great questions.
Just to interrupt, have you seen Nick Cave more than once?
No, just the once. Just the once. Best concert I've ever been to, I actually put on my website. I haven't looked at it in about 20 years. I actually listed my top 10 gigs. But it would...
Do you ever listen to the Nick Cave album? I don't know if it's called Jubilee Street or is it called Push the Sky Away?
Pushing the Sky Away, with his wife on the cover. Yeah,
that is such a good album.
I've heard bits and pieces of it. I'm not that familiar with the album. I should listen more. My problem is I get just my head stuck in the 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s.
You just can't get out.
I don't really have time to listen to anything new. But top gigs would include 9 Inch Nails in Sydney.
Oh, yeah. What year?
At the Big Day Out, and I think it was the year 2000. We camped out for tickets,
man,
and we were at the front of the line. We're actually on TV.
Wow.
We've got a video, the TV interviews my friend.
That would have been spectacular.
And with a zillion people camping out for tickets, it was a blast. And so 9 Inch Nails at the Big Day Out. Obviously Nick. Jimmy Webb at the Basement. Jimmy Webb, who wrote Bright Eyes and By the Time I Get to Phoenix. Brilliant composer from the 60s and 70s. Art Garfunkel, performing live at the State Theatre in Sydney, which is interesting because he's on the stage and he's introducing his band. Art Garfunkel, he's just some of the most beautiful, magnificent compositions and slow, tragic songs. I love them. And then he says, this is so-and-so on the piano. He plays keyboards live. He plays keyboards live for 9 Inch Nails.
Oh, wow.
So this dude, whatever his name was, goes touring live with Art Garfunkel.
Yeah.
And with 9 Inch Nails.
That's crazy.
So that's just a couple that come to mind. I could look at my website and pull out the list. But
what a counterpoint.
Yeah.
Were you ever in... Were you in bands growing up? Did you ever
well, not properly. I've played here and there with different. We had little, fun kind of bands in garages, but nothing significant.
Yeah. Did you play guitar or?
Just a bit of keyboard.
Oh yeah, cool.
So I like to string sad minor chords together.
Yeah.
And I like to we had a lot of fun, but I never did any real live gigs or anything. If you know the singer Sarah Blasker, we're friends with her back
I've heard of her, yeah.
when she was singing in the worship band at Christian Life Centre in Waterloo.
Oh,
which
really?
later became Hillsong, and I think she's quite, I don't know if I'd use the word, hey Sarah, I love you. I think she's quite, this is my perception, Sarah, that maybe you're a bit embarrassed of that history, and you certainly have implied that you don't believe that stuff. And that's cool, you know. You might not have seen, you know, a lot of spiritual stuff. I've seen some crazy spiritual stuff, so I can't not believe. But, you know, I'm not judging people who don't believe. But basically, I remember, you know, playing keyboards with her. We went with her and her sister Kate and a couple of others up to the Blue Mountains, playing keyboards with Sarah Blasker singing in a church. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, Sarah's a genius, a brilliant artist, and so it's very interesting. And I saw her recently. We saw her doing a performance at Camperdown, and I mentioned to her that when she was 16 years old, she came up to me. Sorry, Sarah, to say this. She came up to me when she was 16 years old and said, I think my memory is the words were, I had a dream and God showed me I'm going to be a famous singer one day around the world. And I remember, and I said to her, just because I mentioned this to her when I saw her a month ago or whatever, a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I didn't believe you. But now look, here it is, it's real, you know. So whatever that was, that dream or that experience, whatever it was when she said that, and she said she didn't remember, you know, she didn't remember saying that to me or having that experience, but I remember it very, very clearly. You know, she was about 16 and she said, hey, God showed me this, you know. So there's something spiritual in everything. You know, and where it gets really interesting is a lot of people say, well, I don't want to believe Christianity, but I'll believe other spiritual things. You know, it's like the first question is, do you believe the spiritual dimension? You know, people have seen angels, they've seen dark spirits, they've seen supernatural things. And to me, it's so brutally obvious that the spiritual dimension is real, right? And I guess the key message from atheists and apparently, you know, even... we won't even get into Satanists, but atheists, basically the key message is there's no spiritual dimension, you know, and everything's psychological, whatever else. And, you know, that's all great, you know, they can believe anything they want, but I heard that it's like 95% of the world believes in the spiritual dimension and believes in some kind of God. And so if you've seen anything spiritual, if you've experienced anything spiritual, properly, you know it's real. I've seen some crazy stuff, man, and I know it's real. And then the next question after that, once you've established, hey, there is a spiritual dimension, is, well, what is the truth?
Yeah.
You know?
What do you want to do about it?
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting. Every religion says that Jesus is a good guy, right? But Jesus himself said, I'm the only guy. I'm the only way to heaven. No one can get to heaven except for through me, right? And it's just like, that's... You know, so C.S. Lewis was the one who said that either he's a liar, right, and all these miracles are all fake, whatever, okay, but then, you know, whoever's seen the spiritual dimension knows that these things are real. Either he's a liar or he was just a maniac, just a psychotic freak, which Bob Geldof has implied it a couple of times, you know, or it's true. There's no really many other options in between. Either he's a liar, he's a freak, or it's real. And then Jesus said, you know, if you believe in me, you'll do greater miracles even than I've seen. And I collect videos of miracles. I collect doctors' reports of miracles. I've got, in my collection here on a 4 terabyte hard drive, I've got literally, I'd say thousands of videos of miracles and hundreds that I've filmed myself. When we were in London, in Kensington Temple Church in London, there was, throughout all of 2008 and early 2009, there was a crazy revival of miracles. And people that are blind, they pray for them. On camera, I've filmed it myself and then they can see. People that are deaf, born deaf in one ear or both ears, completely deaf, and then they can hear on the spot. And it's just to see this stuff with your own eyes and to know it's people that you've known in the church, for a long time, and then it's real. And then to also get copies of the doctor's reports. I've got on my computer there over 100 doctor's reports of miracles where the doctors say there's no possible physical explanation of this. Our assessment is there's something spiritual or something that is unexplainable. And in the case studies, they talk about the prayer occurred on this date, and then the tests occurred on these dates, and all this stuff. So to me, the evidence is just so phenomenally massive that Jesus is God. I can't ignore it, and that's why, in a sense, I had to build these.
Yeah, can you tell me about them?
Yeah, well, basically,
Holy words of God.
.com. Basically, I created these books because they didn't exist. I couldn't find anything, any website or any books in the whole world which had a comprehensive list of everything that God says, everything in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation on key subjects. For example, the subject of heaven. Yeah. Right? You got 1 million people that write books on heaven, right? Okay. But what does God say about heaven, right? So the Bible itself says that all scripture is God-breathed, right? It says there's 340 passages in the Bible where it says every word in the Bible is breathed by God. It's perfect. It's given by God and it's perfect, right? Infallible is another word. And basically, I couldn't find any book that had every single verse or passage in the whole Bible about heaven, right? Or any website. And there's a lot of them out there, and they've got 20 verses and 50 verses here, but nothing comprehensive, nothing in canonical order from Genesis to Revelation. That's a comprehensive list. And I thought, well, I've got to do it. And so I basically gathered every single verse on the subject of heaven. And the first subject I actually gathered was called the Holy Bible. It's basically what I mentioned earlier, every verse where God says, you must believe my words, and God is really serious. Believe my words because it affects eternity, And that was 340 or so passages. And then I did the same on the subject of hell. A lot of people say, hell, is hell real? Well, it's not about what I believe, it's what God says, And I believe what God says, And basically, it's every passage in the Bible, everything in the Holy Bible, from Genesis to Revelation on the subject of hell. And whether I like it or not, God said it, and I believe it because God said it. And then other subjects like miracles and prayer and worship. And so basically, if you go to the website, sorry to plug it,
No, that's what it's here for sure.
holywordsofgod.com, it's basically every verse in the Bible on these subjects, And I didn't want to create it, but I had to because it didn't exist. And so it's 32 subjects, and then we've printed them as books and used some really pretty colours and pretty icons.
Yeah, it looks great. Do you plan on doing more? Because I imagine that there's...
No.
Okay.
No,
Absolutely not.
Because they're overarching subjects, they're core subjects. So, for example, you've got the subject of repentance there. And people say, well, what about grace? And what about forgiveness? Well, it's all under that overarching subject of repentance. Some people say, I want God's grace, but I don't want to repent. Right? Well, you can't have one without the other, So I deliberately didn't create a book called Grace, although there's a zillion verses in the Bible about God's grace. He'll forgive you like that.
Yeah, if you repent. Did it take you time to figure out what what headings you were going to use?
Yeah,
because you are.
It kind of developed initially over 6 months or a year, and then the whole project took about 5 years. But basically, so. And people say, I want God's grace, but I don't want to repent. And so I thought, I'm not going to have a subject called grace because people just receive the grace without the repentance. That's a load of trash. Who do you think you are, man? So the subject is called repentance because that's the call to action. We've got to repent. We've got to be right before God and be sincere and not, just demand God's forgiveness and think, hey, I'm going to heaven because I joined the club. I joined the Christian club. I said some prayer. I put up my hand, and hey, I can go to heaven. The Bible says, no, man. You got to be real. You got to be sincere before God because we're all going to stand before Him.
Do you have a favourite one?
Yeah, probably the first one, the Holy Bible, because it's God really talking about believe my words. And when you read it, you don't need to buy the book. Just go to the website. It's all free. And you read through all those verses, you can see that God really means business. He really cares about us. He really wants us to get to heaven. But he says, if you don't believe my words, if you don't receive my words, you don't love me. And, so...
Yeah, he's not passive.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
That's right, yeah. It's wild
But he
stuff.
will let you make mistakes.
That's right, yeah. And he gives us grace, and he gives us 100 years to repent, And some people wait. It's dangerous, man, to wait till your deathbed before you repent. A lot of people, I know people who say, I'll repent when I'm on my deathbed. But a lot of people say that, but they don't get the chance. Get whacked by a bus, boom, you're gone, man. And when you're talking about eternity, right, if this stuff is real, right, if it's real, right, which I absolutely believe because I've seen this stuff, right, if it's real, man, that's not a risk you want to take, Have you heard of Pascal's wager?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so Pascal was a massive mathematician in the 1600s, and he's a genius mathematician. He's come up with a lot of the principles of mathematics that we use today. And he published a wager. He said this is, well, they call it Pascal's wager, but basically he says that any reasonable human being will choose the side of God rather than choosing to reject God. Whether they have evidence or not. Now, the evidence is around them. You've got all of creation. You've got the history. You've got miracles. You've got so much evidence. But basically, his wager is that any reasonable human will choose the side of God rather than choosing to reject God, because the consequences are so significant. If it's real, he says, well, first of all, if it's not real, then what do you miss out on? 100 years of extra sex. Right? 100 years of living in debauchery, whatever, right? Okay. Right? But if it is real, you've got eternal consequences, and you can still have your love and your sex in marriage and your whatever, but it's basically, is it real or not? And the wager is basically this: if you choose to believe God and to follow God, you've got an eternity of paradise waiting for you. And the Bible talks about that as it says, no eye has seen, nor has even conceived in the heart of man the glory that is waiting for him, right? The wonders, the excitement, the paradise that's waiting for us, right? If we choose God, right? Or if it's real, and we reject it, then Jesus talked about, in his words, everlasting punishment, So it's pretty polar stuff. It's like paradise or punishment. And so Pascal said, basically, as a mathematician, you'd be an idiot not to choose the side of God. What do you miss out on? I mean, your pride? Hey, I don't believe in God. I'm too cool. I mean, come on, man. It's fascinating stuff. And I'm very interested in people like Richard Dawkins, right? He's a great thinker, right? Okay, but it's like he's one of the world's most prominent atheists, and basically he hates God. If you listen to what he says,
he's got a real problem.
Yeah, he's got a problem, right? But I'm very interested in him, and even he recently has acknowledged, he calls himself, you ready for it? A
cultural Christian.
A cultural Christian, yeah. Because he recognizes the blessings that have come into society and culture because of Christendom and because of, and there's a lot of trash in churches and priests that are actually serving Satan and pretend to be Christian, and they're hurting people, bastards. I won't even get into that because I'll break the microphone or something if I get passionate talking about these evil people. But the thing is that there's so many different elements involved, and so I'm very interested in everything that everybody's got to say. Have you heard of Anthony Flew?
No,
One of the
I haven't.
World's biggest atheists in the 60s and 70s, he wrote a book called There Is No God, and then as a highly respected atheist, he spent his whole life proving in his mind that there is no God. And he was basically, many would have said at the time that he was the world's most celebrated atheist, in the atheist community. And basically, then he released a book called There Is No God, and he crosses out the word no, and it says there is a God.
Oh, really?
Basically, yeah. And the subtitle of the book is how the world's most prominent atheist changed his mind.
Wow.
And he talks about what he can see the spiritual dimension is real. He can see the evidence, right? And I believe that Richard Dawkins will eventually one day come to that realization. It'll either happen, hopefully soon, and hopefully not until his deathbed. But if it doesn't happen on his deathbed, it'll happen about 3 seconds after. He'll realize, oh crap, this is all real. And he's going to stand before God. And like every other human, I love him, man. I don't want him to go into darkness. I don't want him to spend eternity in darkness. I want him to make it to heaven. And everybody who's evil, everybody who's smashed up and spent their whole lives doing evil and wickedness, I want them to just repent. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just saying I want them to make it to heaven, I want them to make it to paradise. And I weep about it sometimes, because I know it's real. I've seen it. We've got friends who've been to heaven. We've got a friend, Ian McCormack. Have you heard of Ian McCormack, the jellyfish man?
No, but I went to school with a kid named Ian McCormack.
Yeah? Well, this guy's a bit older than you.
Yeah.
But basically...
the jellyfish man?
Yeah, he's quite famous. He's a friend of ours. And he's famous around the world. He went diving for jellyfish, and long story short, you can watch his testimony on YouTube.
Oh, he got stung?
And he got stung, and basically...
Oh, I have seen that guy's testimony. Yeah, I have seen that. Oh, that was an incredible one.
Man, that's the most important thing in the whole world, to watch and listen to him.
Is that where he ended up having to go and get the cab, and the driver wasn't...
That's right.
Maybe he didn't speak English, or he didn't have any money or something.
He didn't have any money.
He had to try and convince him to drive him to a hospital.
Yeah. Wild stuff, man. And basically, he was taken to hell for 20 minutes. My friend Alan and I sat down with him at Manly Beach, and I grilled him. I grilled him for real detail. And man, he gave us a lot of detail. And but his heart had stopped beating for 20 minutes. And he's there in the hospital, and... basically he comes back to life, but during that 20 minutes he remembers everything. And he was taken into, in fact it was probably a bit longer than 20 minutes, I think he said, but basically his experience, he was in darkness, which the Bible talks about as the waiting place, and we can go into detail about that, but basically he was in this darkness, but he could feel his presence there. He could feel it, hey, I'm here. And he could feel the, I don't know, I'm using my own words, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically the essence of his body, so he could kind of feel this is where his hands are, and then he's like, well, I'm in complete darkness, where's my head? So he goes to touch his head, and then he realizes the sensation of his hand
right through it.
Went through his head, and it's like, what's going on? Where am I? And then he hears these voices, and so he thought to himself, where am I? And then he hears voices saying, you're in hell, shut up! Right? And he's like, oh my goodness. Now, he was in this place for, in his words, about 20 minutes. Right? And he said it was the most terrifying thing imaginable. But basically, then this light appeared above him, and he was carried up through this tunnel of light and carried in front of this beam. You watch the video, I'm not going to explain it, but basically he's carried in front of this beam, and he realizes it's Jesus, and Jesus says to him, you got another chance, and then he comes back to life into his body, and he weeps when he tells the story. Even with us, he's sitting alone with us, he starts crying, man. He's like, whew, man. And he was an atheist before. We kind of, I guess, maybe God's real, but he didn't really believe. And he said, oh, maybe. But when he was in that ambulance going to the hospital, at the end there, basically he saw this vision of his mother praying, and then he saw the Lord's Prayer flash before his eyes, including, do you forgive, we forgive everyone else who've done wrong to us, I forgive those who've done wrong to me. And basically he thought in his heart, do I forgive that taxi driver who dumped me on the side of the road? And he said, no way, I don't forgive him. And then basically he felt in his spirit, if you don't forgive him, you're going to go to hell. This is what he experienced, right? And so he said, all right. He softened his heart and he forgave him. And then it was shortly after that he died. And he believes now that God gave him a chance because he humbled his heart at the last second, man. Last seconds, And yeah, long story. So,
I mean, I don't think you have to wait until you die to go to hell. Like when I'm like being all like prideful or like self-important or something like that, or just angry and entitled, like I am in hell.
Yeah.
And it's a shit place to be.
Man, I tell you, and entitlement is a key issue because that's related to pride. Entitlement and pride are the things that destroy us. They destroy our souls. And that's why Jesus said we've got to be humble. Humility is the opposite of pride. Jesus said, unless you convert and become like a little child. Convert and become like a little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. It's like
Is pride something that little children don't have?
Well, I mean, we can go into a lot of detail, but basically the essence is innocence and believing,
Yeah.
And so yeah.
I guess I've never really thought about it, like what pride means to a kid.
But yeah, the essence of it.
Kids want their parents' affection, like kids want to their approval of their parents. I don't know how that relates to pride.
But the essence of it is generally a child will believe what they're told.
Sure.
And most humans put their fist in the air and go, not interested, God. And they got free will too. Free will. Hey man, everyone listening, you got free will to put your fist in the air and go, not interested, God, stuff ya. Go for it, right? But the thing is that, hey man, it's real. I can tell you it's real. You don't have to believe me, but it's real. And I want people to go to heaven, man. That's why I just love people and I'll cry with them sometimes and I'll say, hey man, just consider it, because we're talking about eternity.
Were you brought up a Christian, like in a Christian home? Or
Yeah.
was it something that came later?
Yeah, no, my mum used to, when we were sitting at the breakfast table and eating breakfast, she'd read the Bible to us. And she taught us core principles about to put others first, And so she put a little biscuit and a big biscuit. And she'd say, Dan, which one would you like? And I'd take the big biscuit.
Of course.
And then
I still take the big biscuit.
and then she'd bring out a much, much, much bigger one for my brother.
Oh, wow.
And she'd say, the first will be last and the last will be first. So she taught us to be humble. And the end result of that was, in the future, I'll put my brother first and I'll give him the big biscuit first, So she taught us the core stuff, not to be selfish and to put others first. But I think the investment when a parent teaches you the truth about the spiritual dimension, and especially when you see it for yourself, when you grow up and you go, flip, this is real, man, when your parents teach you, I think that's more important than an inheritance of $1 million cash. I could receive an inheritance of $1 million cash, or I could have my mother teaching me the core truths of eternity and the spiritual dimension, which influences me to live for God and go to as best as possible and go to heaven, and that's worth more than $1 billion, man,
You were always in churches and things like that growing up?
I was a bit of a rebel. I didn't want to go. I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
But again, my parents were going to churches where I saw miracles. I saw stuff, and pretty wild stuff,
I don't know if that I've ever seen a miracle, but I think when your mind's in the right place, I think all of existence is a miracle.
Yeah, that's right.
There's anything at all that I'm sitting across from you, and then we're having a conversation about the Beatles and things that happened 50, 60, that in itself is a miracle. And then recently I've been listening to biology lectures on the internet, like Biology 101, and where they're really just building it from the atoms up. Man, if that stuff isn't a miracle, the way that if you're to believe it, the way that the physical world works on a biological level from atoms up to the biosphere, or just the scale of things. If that doesn't take that takes as much faith as reading as any of the miracles Jesus performed. It takes just as much faith for me to believe what the scientists are telling me about biology and the scale of things and the space between atoms and the millions of strands in DNA and just these numbers that my brain can't comprehend.
Yeah. The essence of that's amazing. It's phenomenal. The essence of what Darwin said regarding his theory of evolution of species is he would have thrown it in the bin if he would have known about DNA. You know?
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's basically, and there's a lot of quotes from him implying these things. But there's a lot of phenomenal documentaries which just show that it's operationally impossible, that's a mathematical term, operationally impossible, for cells to have evolved by undirected natural processes, And like there's, for example, there's a documentary called Unlocking the Mystery of Life. You can watch it on YouTube, and it talks about, it's got stacks of scientists, and they're talking about, for example, the bacterial flagellum motor that makes cells move. And it talks about it as the most efficient motor in the universe that makes your cells move around, right? It's got a propeller, it's got a drive shaft, it's got all this stuff, and this is in cells, right? But yet it's got, I think they said 31 parts. And for it to exist, those 31 parts would have to evolve independently and then come together independently and then operate as one. It's just like, that doesn't happen. And they call that, I can't remember the term that they use for it, but basically, it's just phenomenal stuff, the detail, and there's another documentary called Programming of Life, which talks about the mathematical possibilities of cells existing in human life, evolving or existing by undirected natural processes. And they basically say, and this is what all scientists acknowledge, that it's operationally impossible. I think it's one with however many hundreds of thousands of zeros behind it, more than the number of grains of sand in the universe. You pick a random grain of sand, and that's the chance that it could ever have happened in eternity. It's just operationally impossible. And yet the other evidence we see flowers, we see each other's eyes. Like, I'm looking into your eyes now as we speak. I believe that's the spiritual dimension. We're hearing each other's voices, but it's kind of like we've got the physical dimension intrinsically linked at this point to the spiritual dimension, and we're communicating. Our spirits are communicating. I'm looking at you in your eyes, right? And we're talking to each other. That's our spirits communicating. I believe that that's the spiritual dimension. And I believe when our bodies dissolve or whatever the bleep happens to them, that the spiritual dimension will continue, just like Ian McCormack experienced and zillions of people have experienced, people with near-death experiences, etc., etc. So there's so much evidence. And that's not even mentioning the miracles. All these things, are not even mentioning that, we have friends who had cancer and then got a prayer and then instantly the cancer was gone. We're talking breast cancer, brain cancer, all sorts of other leukemia, all sorts of other cancers. We've got these on video. We've got doctors' reports. The evidence without that stuff is enough for me to believe, but even with that stuff and having seen it with my own eyes, it's just beyond comprehension.
So the non-believer might say in response to that, well, if God was real, why would he create cancer in the first place?
Oh, and it's a funny thing because God didn't create cancer in the first place. God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and it was just going to be one big party. I'm serious.
Yeah.
And all you have to do, you can do anything you want. They're in the Garden of Eden, and they can do anything that they want. There's absolutely anything you can think of. Party, man! It's a massive party. Just don't eat from this one tree, this one particular fruit. Just don't eat that, and that's all you need to think about, to worry about. Anything else you can do, party hard, man, right? And there was no death, there was no cancer, there was no nothing, and but God had to give them free will. So for them to have free will, there had to be one thing that they couldn't do wrong. Just one thing.
Okay.
And that's all they wanted to do, man. I just want to do that one thing that God says I shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Right? And we're all the same.
We all want to do that. Like we all want to do that. Especially, I still want to do it now. When I think about it, I think of like when we're kids, we all want to do that thing we're not supposed to do, know.
And then basically they did it. And God said, and it's interesting because God talks about the two trees in the Garden of Eden. This is highly spiritual stuff, right? You got the tree of life, right? You can live forever. And then you got the tree, not the tree of death. It's not called the tree of death. It's called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God didn't even want us to know about the difference between good and evil. He just wanted us to be innocent, like little children.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
And just party hard, right? But So and he said, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then basically they did, and then that's what the Bible talks about as the fall. And so all of creation fell with it, and basically that brought into, the scene disease, cancer, death, etc., etc. People only live to about 100 and whatever years old now, and then you step into eternity, And so it's very fascinating stuff. I mean, even if it wasn't real, I'd still find it the most fascinating subject in existence, which makes me wonder, why are atheists so militantly against it? Hey man, at very least, it's the wildest sci-fi you've ever thought of, you know?
Yeah.
But the thing is that beyond that, I can see evidence and I've experienced what's real. And I haven't even mentioned experiences that I've had with God and the emotions and different things. That's a whole different story, right? But just the real general stuff, it's like, why are people so against it, And then they say, because churches are evil and pedo priests and whatever else. It's like, those people don't follow what God says. Those people are obviously satanic, right? The Catholic Church generally doesn't obey what God says. They're generally, some people say they're the world's biggest pedo organization, right, etc. I'm sorry for getting into this, right, but people will be using that as to say, that's why we don't want to believe in God, right? But the thing is that when people do those evil things, they're evil. They don't follow what God says. They don't follow what Jesus said. They're just satanic, evil people that become priests. Anyway.
It's interesting when you meet people and you talk about... like if you talk about either like church or Christianity or something like that, and like one of my friends, like I must have been asking about what his thoughts are about like the church, and that his first thing was to think of like Catholic pedophiles, and I thought, oh wow, like that's...
Everybody defaults to that.
It almost shocked me that that's where his mind went, because that's not the first thing I think of. Like But
most people, I would say, do.
Yeah,
and I think the reason is because...
But I guess I'm not aware of that until I ask someone, and that's their answer. I'm like, oh wow, like that's the first place your mind goes.
And what is the reason?
That's crazy.
What is the reason? The reason is because we don't want to repent. We just want to live our lives for ourselves, and therefore it's great to have an excuse to blame somebody else, right? Those evil... And not all Catholics are like that. Many Catholics are beautiful people that truly love God, right? Okay? But
Sure.
God says, don't make statues, don't bow down to them, flip. Come on, man. God says this stuff, and yet people do. And so a lot of people don't follow what God says. But nevertheless, I'm not here to judge anybody else. But people will default to that because it's a good excuse, and it's a good thing to blame. And to be honest with you, it's true. I think this is evidence that Satan is real, because no reasonable human being, normal, good person, is going to go and hurt children and go and do these evil things, And so I think that's evidence of the dark side, evidence of the spiritual dimension.
And like I've met people that I know, like people that I consider friends, that like seem to have this inability to separate the idea that like just because someone calls himself a Christian doesn't make them a Christian.
Yeah.
Like when they talk about like, because Christians never do evil things. I'm like, but no, they don't. That's the difference. Like if they're truly... If they're truly being... No Christian has ever hurt a child.
No true Christian.
Yeah. Like Christian in the sense of like as Jesus intended it.
That's right, exactly.
So it's like you have to and I'm still learning how to do it in terms of like how you talk and communicate. Like you have to make all of these like separations in the way that you talk. Yeah. Otherwise, like people just generally seem to lump all of these things in. So it's all just in the same pot.
Well, it's fascinating because like even the Bible says that Satan appears as an angel of light. Yeah. Right? And appears beautiful and appears, but is actually, pure evil. And the Bible also says that Satan sets up, inverted commas, wolves in the church to destroy it and to basically create rules that God didn't say and rituals that God didn't say and to do evil, wicked things. And we can see that, And but a lot of the world don't read the Bible and they're not aware that, hey, you've got to have discernment when it comes to the spiritual dimension. And a lot of people don't want to know about it, and then they spend their whole lives just giving excuses, and they end up on their deathbed saying, well, it's the Catholic priest's fault that I don't believe in God. And then God's like, hey, man, don't blame someone else. Sure, there's a lot of evil people out there, right? And we're talking evil, right? But there's a lot of good people too. And the whole thing is that we can't blame other people to whether we're going to reject God and put our fist in the air at God, right? Basically, I think God wants humans to be humble. This is where it gets interesting, and it's always getting interesting. I've said that probably a lot of times. But there's an amazing saying, a Jewish saying, which is fascinating. And now it's not in the Bible, but it's basically this. It says, God says, I created humans and I gave them the chance to choose between good and evil, between right and wrong, so that I would know which of them love me. So in other words, God gave us the right to choose between right and wrong so we could know who's going to fight the battle and fight between the flesh and the spirit, to choose the spirit over the flesh and to do what's right, and who loves God, So it's very interesting stuff. And obviously when you see evil out there and these, wicked priests or whatever else, they're obviously the flesh side, the dark side, not the spirit side, the good side,
Did you ever spend any time getting into, looking into Eastern styles of belief systems and stuff like that, the Buddhisms of the world and the Hinduisms and all of that sort of stuff? And
it's a great question. It's not something I really put too much focus on because I'd seen so much in when I'd seen miracles when I was young and as I grew up and different things. So, but I am very interested in the teachings in that I like to compare the teachings to the teachings of Christianity.
And there's a lot of overlap. I find that there's a lot of recently within the last few months, I would say I've started listening to more, just like Buddhist style teachings and talks and stuff like that more than I have in the last 5 years. And just coming back to that place of seeing now that I've been so focused on Christianity for the last few years, coming back to that, and it's often throughout the day, some of the stuff you hear, I go, and then the scripture will come to mind that teaches that same thing. It's
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I like to compare the teachings and see. So most religions basically will say you have to earn your way to heaven. You have to do all this stuff, and if you don't, or you got all this bizarre stuff, reincarnation, and basically yoga is actually a process to facilitate your transition into the next life and all this weird stuff. And people here in the West doing yoga, worshipping demon. Every yoga position is worships a different demon god in Hinduism. Any Hindu will tell you this, And basically, we got people in the West doing yoga, not even realizing it's a form of worship to demon gods there, But basically, I'm very interested in the differences between the teachings. But it's also very interesting that the Bible says that God set up. It speaks the truth so people can discern between what's right and wrong, and basically that the enemy, Satan, basically has set up all religions to lead people away from God and to distract from God, and distract from the truth in particular, and so for that reason I'm very I don't know if I want to use I can't say I'm wise, but I try to use wisdom when it comes to what I'm going to listen to and what I'm not going to listen to, because I don't want to let any dark things into my spirit. I know that the spiritual dimension is real, and so for that reason I'll read an excerpt of some particular teachings or whatever, but I won't delve right into it because I know I know people have gotten possessed by getting involved in that stuff, and then took them years before the demons came out, and so. Yeah, it's very interesting, I think God and eternity and the spiritual dimension has got to be the most exciting subject in the world. Most people in the West, at least, don't even want to think about it, and they're afraid of it and shut up. And I'm like, fine, we don't have to talk about it. I don't care, But especially in terms of other religions, there's a lot of stuff we've got to be wise about because there's a lot of dark stuff, and either Jesus was correct when he said he's the only way to heaven, or it's not correct. If it's not correct, do what you want. But if it's correct, we better we better pay attention, And that's why I'm paying attention to what God says and what the Bible says,
How does your love of music, like you obviously have a deep passion for music, and we share that. Like, how does that influence and interact with your faith? Because to further that, no, let's answer that first, and then I'll.
It's a great question. Firstly, I am so deeply moved by music that I think music is a spiritual thing.
It is. The way it makes you feel,
now,
the way it makes me feel.
Many people have so many different personalities and focuses in their lives. But myself, one of my favorite things, and we've been talking about a lot of rock and roll. I love rock and roll. I love a lot of good heavy music, etc. But my favorite music is slow, sad, tragic music. I love it, man. Minor chords that break your heart, man. And I'd say realistically 80 or 90% of the music that I listen to is I try to listen to the saddest. My friends call it sad bastard music as a quote from
sad
bastard music from what was that film? John Cusack film, High Fidelity.
I don't think I've watched that yet.
Oh man, you gotta see it. You got a list of about 20 things to check out after this. But basically, High Fidelity. Jack Black says, you only listen to sad bastard music. And a lot of my friends say that to me, but I love it. I love it, man. Songs about loneliness, songs about emotions and darkness and tragedy. They just make me feel so good.
Yeah. I've had someone say that to me in the past, and until they said it, I didn't realize I was listening to sad music. Because, to me, I didn't feel sad. I thought, this is the most beautiful thing ever. This isn't sad. Until they said, this is really sad music. I'm like, oh, I'd never noticed.
Yeah.
I guess it is, but
I love it.
There's a disconnect there or something in my head. It's it's not sad in here.
Well, it's interesting because I think I love life so much. I just feel so happy all the time. I just feel ecstatic. And I think it's because of God. But what I say to people is I listen to sad music so it keeps me in balance.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And what's interesting is the some of the time when I do feel sad, which isn't often, sometimes you feel sad, at those times, which are quite rare, I can't listen to sad music. I have to put on happy music, So I'll put on Talking Heads, or I'll put on, some crazy, funny music, upbeat, whatever. But so it's very interesting. I'm absolutely convinced that music is spiritual. And it also, we were talking about good music and dark music earlier. We were talking about the Stones and things. The Bible in Isaiah talks about how Lucifer, which is his name when he was an angel in heaven, before he led a rebellion and got cast out of heaven and became a fallen angel, and his name was changed to Satan. Lucifer was the head of music in heaven.
Oh, really?
You don't know that?
That's why they say rock and roll is the devil's music.
Yeah. So he was the head of music.
No, I don't know that.
Yeah. And it talks about it in Isaiah. You can actually read the page called Demons from Holy Words of God, and it mentions all this. So he was the head of music, and it says he was the most beautiful of all the angels. He was like glowing ruby, just magnificent. But he said, I am the most beautiful. He had pride. He said, I am the most beautiful, but I want to be as the Most High. And he led a rebellion in heaven, and basically, it says a third of the angels fell. So Lucifer was so enticing, his beauty, his music, his brilliance, right? His art was so enticing and so magnificent that he convinced a third of the holy angels to turn against God. And those third of the angels, it says, were cast out of heaven, and they became what we know as fallen angels or demons, and they now lead people to do evil things. And so if you talk to people that are possessed or schizophrenic and they hear voices, and those voices that are basically demons telling them to do wicked things until you get the demon cast out. I know a lot of people, many people, who doctors will say, oh, it's just an imbalance in the brain. That's BS, man. It's spirits, right? And when you get the demon cast out, suddenly the voices stop. Right, and I could share so many testimonies. I could bring friends on your podcast if you want to tell you what they experienced, when they were hearing voices until the demons got cast out. But basically, it's real. you know, and evil spirits that I'm certain are the ones that are behind these evil priests we were talking about, and certain that were doing these things. I also think.
Do you find that like that idea of evil spirits, like people use that to take away the responsibility that they have in any like given situation to choose between good and evil? You know.
There was an actual court case in America, I think in the 70s. There's a documentary on Netflix about it, where a guy actually said, and it was the first time in history that it happened in court, he said, "The devil made me do it." And you've heard that phrase, I'm sure. And that was his argument in the court case. And I can't remember, but I think he ended up getting the insanity plea. I can't remember. But there's a doco, and I haven't actually seen the doco. But there was a real life court case in America where this guy was a murderer, and he said the devil made me do it, and that was his argument. So
because it's slightly different, but then it's also not different in that, like, say someone like me trying to understand myself, and there's a temptation to look at the past and try and explain like the decisions you've made, like because of your upbringing and like that whole nature versus nurture sort of thing, and like oh well, you know, I only did this and I only think this and I only am this way because of like my upbringing, you know. That's almost like there's a hint of that the devil made me do it in having that type of thinking. Like you're giving your or authority to the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. But in a sense, I see it as excuses.
Yeah.
You know, and Adam and Eve did the same thing, right? You know, Eve is in a conversation with Satan, right, who manifested as a snake. We can go into detail about that.
The reason I bring it up is because I'm genuinely trying not to be that way. But it's almost like thought patterns that you're sort of stuck in. Like you're stuck in this groove of who you are.
And we all want to do bad things, you know. We're inherently bad. That's why the Bible talks about there's a constant fight between the flesh and the spirit. And it says, in Romans, it says, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus who walk according to the Spirit and not according to the flesh. In other words, you're not out, you know, living, you know, doing things that God has forbidden and said reserved for holy situations like marriage or whatever else. And you're fighting the battle, right? And people stumble, they make mistakes. We're not judging people. But basically, you got to fight the battle between the Spirit and the flesh, you know? And I was just saying earlier that basically everyone gives excuses. And so Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Satan manifests in the garden and says to Eve, go on, eat from this tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she says, well, God told us not to. And he says, you know why? Because he knows that if you eat from it, you'll get knowledge. You'll know. You'll be like God. You'll know the difference between good and evil. And so she chose to. She decided to eat it. And then she convinced her husband, Adam, to eat it. And he ate it. And so basically when God confronts him, Adam says, well, my wife told me to do it. Right? and Eve says, well, the devil told me to do it, right? The snake told me to do it, right? So everyone's blaming everybody else, right? Okay, and these are deep spiritual concepts, you know. It's like, you know, this is significant stuff.
Like when my girlfriend wants to be healthy and she blames me for bringing bread and carbs and sugar into the house because I can just not eat it. Like I can bring it in and not eat it, but she'll just once it's there, she'll eat it and blame me about it.
That is
blame
so funny.
Me for it.
Yeah, my wife is super healthy. She eats amazing, you know. Salads and all sorts of stuff, but she likes a bit of cheese. But I've got a cheese problem. I love cheese, man. Yeah.
And
I'm trying to be healthy, and I've got a bit of a belly, and so I'm trying to be healthy. So I tell her, honey, hide the cheese. You know, don't let me know where it is in the fridge, because if it does, I'll eat the whole bleeding thing in one day.
Do you have a favourite cheese?
I just love all cheese. You know, I like melted cheese on toast.
Yeah, I guess that's right. All cheese is good.
So, but it's very, very unhealthy, you know, and so, you know, I'm trying to be healthy and try to you know, just eat fruits and vegetables and things. And
do you cook much? You know,
bits and pieces, you know, but my wife is a magnificent cook.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you have a favourite cuisine?
Well, okay, my wife makes some phenomenal things, and she's taught me to make them too. One thing that we make is zucchini fritters.
Oh, nice.
So it's like 90% zucchini shredded. We got this machine from Target for like $20, whatever, that just shreds it into like tiny spaghetti, tiny, thinner than the thinnest spaghetti you can think of, and then a little bit of flour with it, and then it's like 90% zucchini, and you just fry it as a zucchini fritto.
Yeah.
It's just delicious. It's
Amazing.
super healthy.
Yeah.
Super, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I love zucchini fritters.
But the trick is when it's like 90% zucchini and flour, it's just so delicious. It's phenomenal. And then you slam some avocado on it when you're eating it. It's just great.
Apologies if I interrupted the answer to your question about how your love of music influences and interacts with your faith. Did you feel like we covered that?
Yeah, I think so. Basically, I feel that it's spiritual.
Yeah.
And
It's like
it moves me
spiritual
so
medicine.
deeply. Like the Beach Boys, right? I love all their happy songs from the early 60s, but then they grew up and they grew beards and they started writing dark, tragic songs with real emotion. Some people say that it's the first time that real, genuine emotion, genuine pain was expressed vocally in music with Brian Wilson. A lot of people say that. And they started writing these tragic songs like Caroline No, and songs like Carry Me Home to My Daddy in the Sky. These tragic songs about death and about loneliness and about growing old. And I think music moves me so deeply in my soul, whether it's happy music or sad music, the emotion, it convinces me that, that there's something spiritual about it, yeah.
I always find that like just the fact that the Beatles exist at all is as much proof to me as God exists as anything. Like how those
They're
four,
in Liverpool.
Yeah, those four personalities found each other and did what they did, and who they are as individuals, and then who they are as a collective, and just. Like, if that's not proof of God, nothing is.
It's like something happened spiritual to bring him together. Either it was as Bob Dylan says, it was either God or the devil, but something happened to bring him together,
Yeah.
And I think that the world, the music is just so brilliant because of it. At the same time, people argue that they brought that since the Beatles and since a lot of rock and roll, and I love rock and roll, I love music, but since a lot of that culture has turned, a lot of the world has turned against God, because remember, a lot of the Western world was Christian nations before.
Then they brought in a lot of that Eastern stuff, the Eastern influences.
And the whole rock and roll revolution and the sexual revolution and live for yourself. So it's interesting, but I love music all around, and so...
So where, coming into that, would you place, there's the temptation, especially when it comes to music, for idol worship. So how do you balance those two things?
You mean worship the performer?
Yeah, because I think I definitely did, growing up, as a kid, I'm much better at it now. I see that it all comes from God. God writes all the music, all the songs, But there's that when you're growing up and you don't know anything else, that's you want to be like them, you want to do what they're doing, and so you end up worshipping the instrument if you don't know any better.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess as kids, they make the musicians their idols, etc., etc. I didn't really do that, but obviously people do, and you got these freaky whole.
They definitely do, otherwise they wouldn't pay.
Taylor Swift fans.
You wouldn't pay that much money for concert tickets if you didn't.
Well, it's a spiritual experience going to a concert too, whether it's a good spirit or a bad spirit. But you've got a lot of people, that's true, that, in a sense would worship their, musicians, their idols, rather than worshiping God. And so there is definitely something in that. I personally hope and think that I'm not... doing that, but I've got to keep myself humble, just in case, Also, you're talking about you feel that all music is from God. I think it's definitely. I think that all music is definitely spiritual, but I know a lot of music isn't from God, but it is spiritual. I think I could say it's from the devil or whatever, from the demonic forces or good angels, bad angels, whatever, fallen angels, but it's definitely all spiritual. When it comes to Jimmy Page writing Stairway to Heaven in, I think he said 12 minutes or something, and you got some pretty bizarre lyrics going on there, and you know, you play it backwards and whatever message it's got. I think I'd hesitate to say that was from God himself, and I'd say it's possibly from a different spiritual source, possibly dark. You know, having said that, I love the song, but knowing the spiritual elements behind it, I don't listen to it often. But I love Led Zeppelin, you know.
Yeah, I guess it's got that building a tower, the Tower of Babel vibes, right?
Yeah, that's right. You know?
Like they try to build that tower to God, the stairway to heaven.
And you know, if you're talking about the Tower of Babel, there were certainly you know, evil elements influencing that, and so you know, whether there's what music has evil behind it or good behind it, it's a very, very complex thing, you know, and that's why, in a sense, I like to keep my mind open. I won't listen to any music which has got evil, demonic messages, and there's a lot of it, you know. For example, I won't listen to Imagine by John Lennon.
Okay.
It's a beautiful melody, magnificent song, what a composition, but I got to tell you, it's evil, man. Go on, imagine there's no heaven. Go on, it's easy if you try. Go on, reject God. Go on. And next thing you know, you've rejected God and you're on your way into darkness, you know? Basically, that's the essence of it. And so that's why the Bible says that the devil appears as an angel of light, because it sounds so beautiful. It sounds almost like a spiritual song. But if you listen to the lyrics and the spirit behind it, I think that song was composed by Lucifer, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but hey, man.
No, I can see where you're coming from. As to why you would think that. Yeah.
But then on the same album, you've got these beautiful other tracks. Oh my love, for the first time in my life, my mind is wide open, my eyes are wide open. You know, I can feel love for the first time in my life. Beautiful songs. You know, I don't want to say that was composed from the dark side, but if it's used to, you know, lead people en masse into darkness, possibly it is. But who knows? And that's why I think that there's possibly multiple spiritual sources. I don't know. It's possible that God wrote Oh My Love and the devil wrote Imagine. I don't know. But what I do know is they're spiritual, and I think there might be something in that. Lucifer is not stupid. He's smart, and if he knows he can suck people in with 5 really loving songs and then one song that makes them go, you know what, let's reject God. That's a package. It's possible that's, you know.
I always loved Oyoko.
Yeah.
I love that song. Like, because again, like I just feel the love that he has for Yoko, whether she's a witch or not. Like his love for her was real.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Giovanna and I love that song. We sing it to each other. I go, Giovanna, my love will turn you on. We sing it to each other, you know. So,
it's just beautiful.
It's so happy.
Like that's got like a childlikeness to it. Like it's a childlike love and innocence to that.
Absolutely. And so there's, you know, there's a lot going on. It's not just a simple judge someone answer, you know. I mean, you know, John said in the song "Beautiful Boy," you know, when you go to sleep, say a little prayer. Every day in every way, it's getting better and better. You know, who knows? He might have been kind of pressing towards God just in those last moments of his life. That was published just before he died, you know, and.
Is that one of his later songs?
That was "Beautiful Boy." That song was on the what was the name of the album? Flip, I can't remember. The last album that they published before he died, just before this maniac who called himself a Christian, Mark David Chapman, who called himself a Christian. He's having voices in his head, and those voices said, "Shoot John Lennon." Right? It shows that, you know, churches, you know, while most of the people in there might be people that genuinely love God, there are some maniacs who are possessed and have voices and do evil things. So, yeah, we know that, you know, most people that are in church love God, but there's a lot of wickedness in there too, and you've got to use discernment, you know?
Yeah. You've been to you were saying that you didn't go. No, actually, first I want to ask, what about the Eagles?
I was going to bring up the Eagles before too.
Because to me, they're like the American Beatles.
Oh, I
like
love
just
them.
absolute perfection.
There's times that I would say I prefer the Eagles to the Beatles, even, you know.
Yeah. And I would say that like that's equally right. That is correct.
Yeah, including their solo work too. But especially as the Eagles on their first album, the eponymous album, self-titled album. There's a track called "Most of Us Are Sad." It's about the human race.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I know that one.
Sad. You got to hear it, man. It's phenomenal. Add it to the list.
Yeah, no, I listen to a lot of the Eagles because one of my workmates, they're like his favourite band, and I'm always egging him on to put them on. I'm always down for it. What's it called?
Most of Us Are Sad, on the first Eagles album. But every album just loaded with beautiful, beautiful compositions.
And the harmonies, the vocal harmonies.
Harmonies.
Like, again, there's something like spiritual about vocal harmonies.
So yeah, it's fascinating. But the Eagles liked to have this kind of evil element about them too. You know, they played off on the whole Hotel California thing. You know, like whether it was the Holy Spirit hasn't been here since 1969. If you know those stories about Hotel California, and on the first album there was Take the Devil, but you know the lyrics are Take the Devil from your mind, but then it's still they're presenting they're on their peyote and whatever drugs they're on, and they all mask things to say it's good, but then it's like take the devil, you know, even though it's like don't take the devil. It's take the devil, you know. So very interesting, you know. So some of the most beautiful music and the most brilliant music, and also possibly evil, but maybe not.
Yeah.
So that's why I won't listen to a song like "Take the Devil," despite its lyrics. But I will listen to songs like "Most of Us Are Sad" because it just makes me feel so good.
You said you lived in London for a couple of years.
Yeah.
How was that?
Love it, yeah, beautiful. You know, we got married, and I waited till I was married before I, went overseas, and so we decided to go to London for a couple of years.
You see any gigs there?
That's a great question.
So I imagine there'd be a
we
lot.
went to
there'd be
very
a lot
little
flowing through there.
Yeah, I know, but we were just focused. We got slammed into this church, Kensington Temple, which had just had this revival start in April 2008. Yeah, so April 2008 it started, and they were having. We came into this church, and which was usually having services one night a week, and there's so many miracles happening. They started having services 6 nights a week, and people coming all the way from around England to get healed because there's so many miracles, man. I put a video on YouTube called Kensington Revival 2008, and you see videos there that I've filmed and others of zillions of miracles, so many of them, and you actually see them happening, you know, and some snippets of the footage and some full-length footage. And so, because we're so involved in these revivals happening there, I can't even think of seeing. We saw a bit of jazz. My wife's into jazz music, so I remember going to a couple of jazz gigs. But usually, I'd be like, "Bam, let's go see all the bands." But we were so focused on this spiritual stuff we were seeing and experiencing that I can't even think. I remember. The only musical thing I can really, general secular music thing I can think of, I'm such a fan of Pink Floyd. There's some photographs of Syd Barrett outside his terrace house in London in Earl's Court, and he's sitting on the ground there, and there's these beautiful tiles, and I thought, I've got to find this place, and I've got to see where this history started. And so I went and I found the actual terrace house. I didn't get it from the, I think I got the name of the street from somewhere, but I didn't know the number. But I walked and I looked at the photos, and I looked at the actual tiles on the side of the street and of the terrace house, and I found it. I found the spot where Syd's there, Syd Barrett with his girlfriend, and these classic photos of the history of Pink Floyd, you know. And so that's the only thing I can really think of. And my wife and I were going to go to Liverpool and check that all out, but we didn't really get around to it. We did spend a lot of time. London is amazing. England is amazing in Europe because we were flying Ryanair and EasyJet flights. We went £5.
Wow.
To Amsterdam, Roma, Paris, we were going to all these different places about once every 2 or 3 weeks. We're based in Queensway in London, in the West End, and then it would cost more to get to the airport than to get the flight to some European city. So we're going all the time. That's what we were focusing on. But we didn't see much live music, which is, in a sense, disappointing. But I am much more interested, and I was much more interested in the spiritual stuff.
Yeah, certainly. You were sort of saying that when you were younger, you weren't really into church, and then you've kind of found your way back somehow?
I was a rebel. I was much more into partying and doing things which God explicitly says don't do before marriage and whatever. And I was much more interested in living for myself. And so while my parents were going to church into that, and I did go along, especially when I was younger, I left home when I was, 17, I think, 16 or 17. And I just went and moved to Newtown and just partied hard. But
you just found
I always
your way back
believed,
somehow? Yeah.
Well, I always believed, because once you see it, it's real,
Yeah.
It's like, people say, I used to believe all that stuff, and I think it's all manipulation. But when you see a miracle, and you see it, and you know that the person was struggling with this disease for years, or they were deaf for life, or whatever else, and then bam, in front of their eyes, in front of your eyes, they get healed. It's like, you can't unsee that. And when you experience spiritual things yourself and you see things, it's like you can't unsee those things, And so that's why I'm saying I don't judge Sarah Blasco if she says she doesn't believe, but there was a lot of spiritual stuff going on in that church, and she grew up seeing that. So I don't know what she did or didn't see, but I can tell you I saw stuff that I can't unsee. I saw miracles. I had experiences that I know this is real. There's no bleeding psychological stuff here. This is real, And I brought friends from the goth scene, and we're talking about goth clubs, and I'd say, I dare you. If God's real, you'll experience him. And they'd say, no, I don't believe nothing. I'd say, I dare you, then come. And someone will pray for you, and you'll either having an experience or it's all BS, right? And they'd say, all right, tough guys, tough chicks, cool chicks, right?
Yeah.
All right, I dare you, right? And then they'd stand there, and then someone would get to pray for them, wouldn't even touch them, and bam, they're on the floor for 20 minutes having a vision of Jesus, an experience that they didn't believe for a second before. And then after that 20 minutes, they get up, and they're like, that's it, this is all real. And they're full-on Christian, they become a missionary.
It's the same when you see, people that are really called to do, pastors that are really called to do street preaching, and a conversation, how they're able to navigate through the confrontation of skepticism, especially at the starts of a conversation, and people, really pointing their fingers at them and stuff, and over the course of 20 minutes to an hour, it turns into a dialogue, and then it turns into them praying with them, and then
they're hugging and
it's amazing. I would love to be able to do that one day. That God would have to put his hand on me for that though. That's just a whole nother level of just incredible. Being just standing. That's the frontline stuff.
It's amazing stuff. It's wild stuff. And, it's interesting that it's often the losers, the dorks, the people that they're not cool, right? But there's little old guys, right? Some of them in their 60s and 70s, and they're out there and they're just kind of preaching God with their microphone. And we used to walk past and go, what a bunch of losers, or whatever, right? But man, they're seeing miracles, right? Man, I've gotten to know a lot of these guys, lots of them. And I've seen miracles happen in front of my eyes while this little old man is praying for someone, or some loser who's got a really bad personality, doesn't know how to communicate properly, yet God still uses him, and they see miracles. And I'm like, what is going on here? I've prayed for people once or twice and seen miracles, but, that's not me, that's God, right? Okay, but then these people, they've seen hundreds and hundreds of miracles. It's like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? What? I prayed for people lots and nothing happened, no miracles. But these guys, just wild stuff. Like a friend of mine, Marika, we had his photo on the wall earlier. He prays for people, man, and God heals them and God touches them. Wild stuff, you know. And he's just this gentle, beautiful soul, and he just loves God so much, you know. So I love it, you know.
Are you? I think of you as someone that loves music. Did you enjoy movies and film and stuff like that?
Yeah, love movies, love film. Yeah.
You got any favourites?
Oh, so many.
Oh,
I
cool.
mean, Mikhail Gondry is one of my favourite directors. The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Mikhail Gondry. Oh, he's not the guy that did the Daft Punk video, is he?
I think he
is that
did.
a different Gondry?
No, that's him. Yeah,
The Around the World one.
yeah. I'm pretty sure that he did that. Yeah,
The French guy.
yeah, French. Yeah. Have you seen The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
You know, I've seen that movie a few times, and I have this sense that like I like to forget it so that I can watch it again. Like there must be some kind of twist in it. I know enough to know that there's like some weird psychological twist situation going on.
That's the story of the movie, to forget.
Yeah. So like, it's getting close to the point where I'll watch it again, but I have to like watch it like years apart. I have to let it fade from my mind.
Love it. He made another magnificent film called The Science of Sleep.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Starring, what's her name? Oh my goodness, I wish I had these. What's her name? So anyway, whatever. But these just magnificent, beautiful characters, just deep, wonderful, tragic, unrequited love stories. You know, he's a brilliant director. He did a number of the so many music video clips. You know, the White Stripes and a lot of bands. He did done some fantastic stuff. I'm a big fan of music video.
Maybe the hardest button to button.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he did that, and he's made so many fantastic videos. But yeah, so he's one of the best directors. But I'm deeply moved by spiritual films too, like The Passion of Christ. Mm-hmm. Right. Every other film about Jesus, you know, he's having a good time on the cross. You know, he's there.
Yeah, that one really actually no.
But when you see Mel's portrayal and Jim Caviezel, I mean, that was raw.
Yeah.
Because in Isaiah, the prophecies about him suffering in Isaiah in the Old Testament, about the Messiah suffering, say he no longer resembled a man. Right? There was 300 prophecies of the Messiah in the Old Testament. 300. And every single one of them were fulfilled with Jesus. 70 of those prophecies from the Old Testament, 70 of them were fulfilled over 3 days of Jesus being crucified and rising again from the dead. And so Mel portrayed that more accurately than I think anybody ever did. And that's another reason why I believe. I mean, 300 prophecies, what are the chances? If you read the prophecies from the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, to a Jewish person, right? And you read them out loud, and you say, who is this talking about? They'll say, oh, Jesus. And then you ask them, where is it from? What I just read to you, and they'll say, oh, the New Testament. And you say, no, it's from Isaiah. It's from the Old Testament, you know. And they're like, what? You know, that's why Isaiah 53 and different other places, they don't want to know about it because it's so obviously Jesus, you know. But I'm getting off track. But basically, Mel portrayed, the Passion of Christ so powerful. And, you know, it's 2025. In 2024, they announced that Part 2 is coming out shortly.
Oh, really?
Which is called The Resurrection of the Christ.
Oh, wow.
And to me, that's the most anticipated film of all history. I'm so ecstatic about it.
Is Jim Caviezel going to be in it?
Yeah. And there's a couple of interviews with Mel talking about it, and I can't remember who's interviewing him, but they say, you can see them on YouTube. They say, well, what's it about? And Mel says, well, you can't really tell the story of the resurrection without the backstory, without the angels getting cast out of heaven. He says, it's not easy to film angels getting cast out of heaven. And I'm like, what? This is going to be... People say it's the greatest cinematographic undertaking of all time, right? You know? Apparently, one of the interviews, someone mentions that about a third of the film is set in hell. Because apparently the Bible says that when Jesus died, he went into Hades, the waiting place where in McCormack was, and released people. You know, so that's something that happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Right? Something that won't happen again, apparently. But but when Jesus died and resurrected, he was taken to hell for 3 days. So Mel's going to be portraying this stuff in part 2. I'm freaking out, man. I can't wait. That's like, to me, going to be the most exciting film in history, literally. So I'm on the edge of my seat. And they said that apparently it's going to be released in 2025.
Oh, cool.
So, man, hold me back. I'm going to go see it.
Yeah, it makes sense as to why, like, when you learn all of this stuff now about Hollywood being such predators and obviously their love of money and probably, you know, sin and debauchery in general, it kind of makes sense as to why they, you know, portrayed Mel Gibson as crazy back in like 2004 and 5. And I'm not saying he might, I don't know the specifics, maybe he was doing some crazy stuff, but like it all seems to fit, you know, after him making the Passion of the Christ and you know, injecting that into the world, why they would want to, you know, paint him as a lunatic.
Yeah, well, the thing is, no one's perfect. And, you know, he was drunk, and apparently he was drunk driving, and so he said some wacko, idiot stuff, negative stuff about Jewish people. And, you know, that is tragic, you know. And so it shows that no one's perfect, you know. We're going to love everybody, but so he's made some mistakes. I love some of the on-screen banter between, for example, Mel Gibson and Ricky Gervais at some of the Academy Awards, and Ricky's really, I love Ricky. He just
great.
pummels people, man.
Yeah.
He's just, oh my goodness.
I'll watch his, it's either the Academy Awards or the Golden Globes. The last one he did when they didn't ask him back, where he just rips everyone. It's one of the greatest comedic things I've ever seen.
It's hilarious. And then one of those scenes, Ricky is hassling Mel Gibson about the moment when he was drunk in the car. And then Mel's got the microphone. So Mel says, I love running into Ricky every 3 years because it reminds me I need to get a colonoscopy. So these guys, they're awesome, you know. So, I mean, yeah, Mel's, you know, everyone's got problems. No one's perfect. I'm not judging anybody, you know. You know, God knows I'm nowhere near perfect, but, you know, we are instructed by God, commanded to live holy. And so that's what we need to strive towards. And if I go, I give up, or I can't, I'm not willing to fight the battle, then that's when I'm in danger. That's when I'm basically on the edge of the dark side. And when people say, God says that's a sin, but no, it's not. No, I don't believe what the Bible says there. That's, I think, the most dangerous thing that anyone can ever do, because you're outright rejecting the commands of God. And so everyone's fighting the battle. People make mistakes. No one's perfect. And people make bad mistakes, and it destroys their lives. But I think the key is to believe. Jesus said, just believe. Man, if you genuinely believe, and therefore you genuinely fight the battle, then and you're genuinely repentant, you'll make it to heaven. God says it, you know. But I think it's about being genuine, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Have you seen The Chosen?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating show.
I remember saying when I was like way younger, I'm like, they could never make the Bible into a TV show. That would be just terrible. That's the one thing they should don't ever make this a TV show. I'm like, mate, they proved me wrong, because that is a damn good show that like has me in tears often.
Great, man, great. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So I'm a big fan of film. I'm a big fan of music film. Pink Floyd The Wall. Brilliant film. Apparently Roger Waters hated it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Apparently he was legally trying to get it blocked from being published.
What doesn't that guy hate? He seems to just hate everything.
I love him. He's such a brilliant artist. But yeah, he's got a lot of hatred, you know.
He does. He really does.
Who knows what's going on, you know, because I do believe that God gave him his talent. But maybe a lot of that hatred is from the dark side too, you know. So maybe there's a battle going on there's definitely a battle going on for his soul.
Yeah, well,
that's definitely
all of our
case.
souls.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'd say music video and music film is my favorite type of movies. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess one last thing I have before we wrap up is just on the idea of like, I've been getting a lot of encouragement recently from people that I love and people that I trust about like believing in myself, you know? And I've always felt like I've always had such low self-esteem and such little belief in myself and my self-worth and stuff like that. And then, you know, how the Bible, I feel like the Bible or church constantly reminds us about how our hearts are evil. And so I've always kind of like substituted that self-belief with belief in God. And that, you know, it's like, I don't need to believe in myself. I'll just believe in God. But then I think that belief in God can almost lead you to be, you know, oh, God will take care of it. And so you don't take any, like...
You don't look after yourself. You don't try to
take any like action or autonomy and authority over your own life. And I guess like just if you have any thoughts about like self-belief, I don't know, like looking at these books, you know, there must have been some sort of self-belief involved in you, like seeing this idea and following it through to its fulfillment, and just that you know, self-belief versus the belief in God, and how to have, you know, hold both of those things in your mind, I guess. I don't know.
It's interesting regarding the books. I guess I don't think that it involved any self-belief because I felt that I had to do it. I felt that God, to be honest with you, I felt that God conscripted me to do it. You know, he commissioned me to do it. It's like because it didn't exist. You know, and I couldn't believe that it didn't exist. It doesn't, you know, there's nothing like it. No books, no website on the planet. And so because of that, I felt it had to be done. In terms of doing it, and it took 5 years in my spare time, I think God's blessed me a lot with my work, and so I've got spare time able to do that stuff, you know.
What do you do for work?
Website development.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so custom build WordPress sites with cool database things, and just hand code the front end and a lot of cool back end stuff. But basically, in terms of the books, I guess it didn't really need any. I just felt that God carried me, and it just happened. I think God wanted it to happen. This is what I think. I might be wrong, you know, but I really feel that God called me to do it. In terms of my life, I think I'm a pretty confident person, and so I feel quite blessed because of that. And I know a lot of people don't feel that way, so I'm not really that good at commenting on that, I guess, so much. But in terms of self-worth, I think that God, when you turn to God, God gives you confidence, you know. I mean, yourself, I don't know how long you've been interested in God, but you seem pretty confident now. How long have you been interested in God and spiritual?
I've never questioned the existence of God ever in my life.
But how recently have you been pressing in?
It feels like more and more every day, really.
Yeah.
Like it just kind of... I look back over my life and can see the seeds being planted through, especially through music would be the main thing, you know, back when I was just a kid.
Yeah, so to answer your question then, the more you press into God, the more confident you become, right? And so in a sense, I think that's maybe why I feel confident. And when I was young, I was a lot younger, I was not confident. I was, you know... I felt like a bit of a loser in school kind of thing in my earlier years. Then I became a bit of a rebel, whatever. But I think the more you press into God, the more confident and strong. I think He infuses us with strength. To me, I see that as you press into God, you know, you seem to be very confident and stronger the more you press in every day, you know. And so I think the same with myself, you know. And so in terms of... what was your initial question? If we are not self-confident?
Well, I guess just I guess it was just me like wondering out loud about how to have belief in ourselves when we're told biblically that our hearts are evil. Well, like how can we then, you know, like that seems like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth in a way.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
but I don't think not believing in yourself is the answer either. You know.
I think that God gives us strength and confidence when we press into Him, and there's a danger in that we can go too far and think we're hot stuff, and then we step into pride and self-righteousness, and as soon as you think you're hot stuff, you're a loser anyway, So we could all stay humble, I think that's basically the essence of it. We've got to keep that balance, right, be confident but be humble. And so, yeah, it's like I don't think we really need to believe in ourselves so much, but we naturally become confident and strong the closer we grow to God. Yeah.
Have you ever listened to Timothy Kellerman? Timothy Keller?
I think I've heard the name, but I don't really.
He's a good. He's a preacher.
What does he talk about?
I don't know, but I'm reading a book of his. It's called A Year with Timothy Keller, and I'm just like every morning I sit down and he just has like one sort of like meditation on
devotion. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. That's really nice, and I'm like starting my days with that each day.
Cool.
Which is really nice. Yeah. I'm not going to a church at the moment.
No.
But I love church more than I ever have, even though, like, ironically, I'm not going to one. But I look forward to, finding myself in a church sometime in the future. And yeah.
Yeah, we go to one in Crow's Nest called the Lighthouse. It's they're just a beautiful, humble group of people, about 100 folk, and deep. They're deep, None of these shallow, dum-dum things. I want deep, So I love these guys. They're deep, they're real, and they're passionate, and they believe every word that God has said in the Bible, every word in the Bible, and we're seeing a lot of miracles and healings and stuff. So just beautiful family,
Have you been to a lot of churches? Would you say over your life?
Stacks.
I'm interested, and again, I was talking earlier about wanting to have a podcast that's specifically about Christianity and faith in general, and to use that as an excuse to go to as many churches as possible, just to speak to people about what they do believe in, and to separate to filter that through my own faith, I guess I'm just thinking about like you're older than me, probably the generation before
I'm 52
me,
years older.
So how many churches would you say you've been to in your life? I'm just wondering about.
You mean visiting or regular member?
Yeah, I guess both.
I've visited like zillions of them. I love. See, as I said earlier, I think the most exciting subject and concept and philosophy and principle in existence is God and eternity, and so. It's what I think about 90% of the time, If I'm not watching The Muppet Show or something fun, I'm thinking about God and deep spiritual things. And so I love to get to churches as much as possible. What breaks my heart of recent is the vast majority of churches don't believe anymore what God says in the Bible. And they're starting to, say, we don't believe this, we don't believe that, we want to be hip and modern. Whereas in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, most churches did believe in creation and baptism and repentance and heaven and hell. Many churches are starting to reject those things. And so I think that's a load of BS. And so I'll lovingly have a good chat to some of the ministers when they get up on their pulpits and say, that's not true. And I'll say, and have a good chat to them, and sometimes challenge them.
Because I guess it seems normal to me, or at least it feels normal to me that, like, I don't know, like I imagine that some people, I guess there's the type of person that grows up in a church and spends their whole life in that church.
Yeah.
And then but maybe majority of people, majority of Christians maybe do go from a lot of different churches throughout their experience. And I just think that's sort of like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just think that's interesting and it seems like that's normal and natural, and because I've seen within myself a desire to like commit to church, but it hasn't things have sort of come up where it hasn't. There's having the desire, but then it not like trying to enact it and it not feeling like the right thing to do.
Well, it's like.
And then it's like, well, but God, I'm trying to like give myself to what you want, and then it's like, well, obviously it's not this. I thought it was.
Yeah. Well, there's so many types of churches and so many different styles and so
As many as there are music.
Yeah.
With great bands.
And there's one thing when it comes to styles of churches, that's great. Different styles. There's rock and roll and there's slow hymns and I love it all. But when it comes to churches that reject things that God say, and God says in Scripture, basically that's when they step in, they become apostate churches. And so I won't have anything to do with those churches. But there's many great churches that do believe what God says. And from there, I say one of the most important things is to find your spiritual home. So you kind of need to journey around and find a church that believes the whole Bible. And then from there, find, which church you feel connection with and community with and is your home. Because I say this to people. I say your spiritual home is more important than your physical home. Because your physical home doesn't affect where you will spend eternity, whether you go to heaven or not, but your spiritual home does. And if your spiritual home teaches things against God, hey, it's going to affect you in a negative way. But if your spiritual home believes the truth and believes everything that God says and believes the whole Bible, and then you press in, then that will affect your eternity. And so I also say your spiritual food is more important than your physical food. I could eat whatever physical food all day, but the spiritual food I take in multiple times a week through churches and different things, that affects where I spend eternity. And so I think it's one of the most important things in the world. And so anyone who's not hasn't found a church home or isn't embedded in a church, I encourage them to step out, cry out to God, and God will lead you to the right community because it's more important than breathing.
That's a great note to end on, I think. Hey, thanks a lot for your time. And we should do this again after when I listen back to it and I dig into all of these recommendations. It'll give me a good jumping off point next time we have a chat.
Rock and roll.
Cool. Did you want to plug this one more time as well?
Well, yeah, that's the website is www.holywordsofgod.com, and it's everything that God says on the important subjects where you will spend eternity.
Rock and roll.